Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2081, Dispute. Noticing that Lorena took a fancy to his sword, Harper narrowed his eyes and held the ancient sword tighter in his arms. Mike already got the soaring snake sword, and now you want to take my sword too? No way, Harper yelled. Lorena looked at him innocently. I didn't say I wanted this sword. Harper breathed a sigh of relief, but what Lorena said next made him nervous again. However, the shadow-bearing sword is a perfect match with Truth of Goodwill and Malice. If you pass the Truth of Goodwill and Malice on to Zen and give this sword to him, it will be great. Bullshit. Don't even think about taking my sword. The mere thought of Lorena wanting his sword was enough to set him off. Zen and Yan also looked at each other helplessly. They wouldn't be able to get a word in this conversation at all. Harper, said Lorena seriously. Have you ever thought that we will return to the source world one day? Duh, of course I have, said Harper, rolling his eyes. To ordinary people, the divine land was extremely large. It was an entire world. There were many true gods and most of them didn't care about anything outside the divine land. They only knew the divine land their whole lives. They only knew its countless regions and divine cities. But, Harper and Lorena were from the source world. They knew that the source world was the center of the chaos and that the divine land was created by Chiyu. It could form an entire circulatory system as well as produce many inconceivable creatures. But so what? No matter how perfect the divine land was, it was just a ship. Harper had dreamed of going back to the source world. He even regretted getting on the ship. He'd much rather die in the source world than live in the divine land. Father said our hope would be born on this ship one day, said Lorena. Then the hope should be born into the Nine Li race. But every one of them was killed, Harper retorted. All of the Nine Li people were descendants of Nine Li race's 9 tribes, and among them were Chiyu's descendants. They hoped that one day a child would be born from the Nine Li race and would have the purest bloodline of Chiyu. They had been working in the depths of chaos and shouldered the burden of rebuilding the Nine Li race. This plan had its merits. Even if the Nine Li race in the source world was exterminated, the fire of hope could still be preserved in the divine land. But with the pursuit of the Yellow Emperor guards, their hope was completely lost. The Nine Li race, which was also called the Sacred Race, was slaughtered. For years, Harper had lived in despair. Even though he had created the debate venue, it was only a try in despair. He just didn't want to see the divine land crash. As for returning to the source world, it hurt, but he knew that that day would never come. Isn't Zen a member of the Nine Li race? Lorena asked. Harper was stunned by her question. Chiyu's blood ran pure in Zen's veins. The moment he touched the sunrise tree, Harper had noticed it. But so what if he had the purest Chiyu's blood? Harper once had this kind of blood before. He can only be counted as half a member of Nine Li race at best. Have you forgotten that his father is not a member of our race? Harper retorted. Now he was making trouble out of nothing. Lorena stared at Harper for quite a while. Her face darkened. This ship could have carried the hope of our race, but now you have chosen to turn a blind eye to it. My father made a mistake in choosing you as the captain of this ship. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned to Zen. Zen, Yan, let's go. Coming here was useless. As she spoke, her long hair floated in the air and coiled around Zen and Yan. But Harper was moved by her speech. He extended his arm and made a pressing motion. An invisible force came down from the top of the well and blocked Lorena. Maybe you were right, Harper said bitterly. Maybe your father picked the wrong person. I'm not determined enough. But there were so many young men of the Nine Li race, 9 leaders, and 100,000 Nine Li guards, and yet they all failed. How can I possibly believe that a low-rank true god will succeed? Zen has created the 1,000 Sanskrit land before he even reaches the other shore realm, Lorena reminded him. So what, is 1,000 Sanskrit land a remarkable feat for someone of Nine Li race? Lorena, you were little when you left the source world and since then, you've spent most of your time in the divine land. You don't know what the source world is like. There are some talents that you can't imagine, Harper said. Lorena was silent. She truly did know little about the source world. However, as long as there's a glimmer of hope, even if it's a 1 in a trillion possibility, I'll try it, Harper suddenly said lightly, eyes glinting with hope and mild determination. I'm afraid I am not as determined as you or that reckless Mike, though. He then looked at Zen indifferently. When your mother gave the soaring snake sword to Mike, I didn't oppose that strongly. I wanted to see what tricks he was going to do with it. But I didn't expect that the shadow-bearing sword that has accompanied me my entire life could no longer stay with me. He held the sword tightly in his hand, and the rest watched as his aura changed drastically. He was like a dead tree that suddenly bore healthy green shoots, the rotten air around his body disappearing. As he slowly raised the shadow-bearing sword, the sunrise tree and the truth of goodwill and malice in the debate venue also changed. The whole non-combat zone also changed dramatically. Concurrently in the famous Sword Divine City, some top-ranked true gods raised their heads and looked in the direction of the sunrise tree in the west. What's going on? Why did the aura suddenly change? What a strong will. What happened in the Sword Clan? Many true gods thought the non-combat zone was a Sword Clan's arrangement. Even in the Sword Clan, only a very small number of people knew the truth about the debate venue. Hayden stood on the top of the tower and looked at the huge sunrise tree in the distance. Doubt filled his eyes. This was not normal. Buzz. Marley was also flabbergasted. The aura from the non-combat zone is no longer useful. And it could no longer suppress the malice in one's mind. What happened to the sunrise tree? He also thought the non-combat zone was formed by the sunrise tree. In the countless divine eras, the non-combat zone had never failed to suppress the killing intent even for a second. But that wasn't the case now. Something was wrong. Chapter 2082, A Sudden Change. In a palace of the heavenly sword divine city, Rochelle was relentlessly pacing up and down the steps. As someone who practiced the murdering godly way and naturally had a killing intent in her heart, Rochelle often gave off a murderous aura. However, after coming to the sunrise tree region, she had been affected by the truth of goodwill. Her killing intent wasn't able to gather while she was here. She despised this feeling and it made her restless. Hey, can you sit down? Sean asked impatiently. He was starting to get annoyed after watching Rochelle walk around for such a long time. They had sent the true gods of their respective clans into the debate venue, but they had no way of knowing what was happening there right now. They could only wait here for the result, so they were all anxious. I wonder whether Tyrone and the others have succeeded or not. I'm afraid it would still be too difficult to kill Zen, said Rochelle with a sigh, ignoring Sean's words and continuing to pace up and down. Walton sneered, although our warriors entering the debate venue have become smaller by half, they are still the top figures among the top-ranked true gods. Wouldn't it be a piece of cake for them to kill Zen, a low-ranked true god? Humph, that's so easy to say. It was not that we didn't have a chance to kill Zen in the Time Sea Forbidden Land. But who killed him? No one, Rochelle said, staring at Walton. How could you forget the humiliation you suffered within the Jade Seal so soon? Back when they were in the world inside the Jade Seal, the lives of so many consummate true gods had been in Zen's hands. Hearing what Rochelle said, Walton became silent. Troy was sitting in a chair with 2 golden Buddha beads in his metal hand. The 2 beads were spinning in his hand, and each time they collided, they emitted a faint light. Troy slowly said, "Don't worry. The 2 siblings of the Luo clan will surely die in the debate venue." A trace of doubt appeared on Rochelle's face. Troy had always been calm and collected. If he said that he was sure about something, then he must have a good reason. "How are you so sure?" she asked. Sean, Walton, and the consummate true gods of the alliance of wealthy clans all looked at Troy. "Because Duke will summon the most powerful incarnation of fear in the debate venue," Troy replied with a smile. "The most powerful incarnation of fear? What is it?" Rochelle asked anxiously. "As you know, Duke wasn't on the floating island for a few years. His points in the arena of legends have all been cleared up because of this," said Troy flatly. "Once upon a time, Duke had been well known in the floating islands. He had ranked first among the top-ranked true gods in the arena of legends and had been known as the most qualified talent to become a consummate true god in these years. At that time, all eyes had been on him. However, a few years ago, he had suddenly vanished, and the Dongfang clan had announced that he was cultivating in seclusion." "Wasn't he cultivating in seclusion? Why wasn't he on the floating island?" Rochelle asked in confusion. A smile appeared on Troy's face. "He didn't cultivate in seclusion. He entered the Abyss Demon region instead." "He entered the Abyss Demon region? Alone?" Sean was shocked. The Abyss Demon region was a forbidden area. Normally, the Dongfang clan would invite warriors from the alliance of the wealthy clans to explore the land together. Even the first and second stages of the land were very dangerous. And ordinary true gods could only explore the land in the company of consummate true gods and top-rank true gods. No, he was accompanied by several demi-holy beings of our Dongfang clan, said Troy. The other consummate true gods became even more puzzled. Several demi-holy beings had accompanied a top-rank true god to enter the Abyss Demon region. This was unheard of. Demi-holy beings were very powerful, so they could definitely advance to the bottom of the Abyss Demon region. But it didn't make sense for them to have taken Duke along. At his cultivation base, he would have been nothing but a burden to them. But while Walton, Sean, and the others were staring at Troy in confusion, Rochelle had already figured out what he was saying. With her round eyes wide open, she said angrily, "If that's the case, why did you ask our Mu clan to send 3 of our elites to court death?" "What do you mean?" Walton was still in a daze. Among the consummate true gods, Walton was the dumbest one. "That is to say, Duke will summon an invincible incarnation of fear to kill Zen," said Sean calmly. "Yeah, it's the fiend named Edmund," Troy said indifferently. "A fiend?" When Walton heard this, his face contorted in anger. "Then Gage and Dunn aren't coming back, are they?" A fiend in the Abyss Demon region was a monster that even these consummate true gods couldn't deal with. That meant that everyone who had entered the debate venue would undoubtedly die. The rest of the consummate true gods had equally angry expressions on their faces. Only the elites of each powerful clan had been sent to the debate venue. These elites were the ones who were supposed to become consummate true gods in the future. They were the future hope of these clans. It was too much to sacrifice their lives like this. "Why didn't you tell us about your crazy plan?" A consummate true god complained with dissatisfaction. If they had known about the plan before, they would have sent a few scapegoats instead of their elite warriors. "If we had sent some scapegoats instead of our elite warriors, do you think the Sword Clan wouldn't have seen right through our plan? We had no other choice but to sacrifice them. Rochelle, your ultimate goal is to kill Zen, isn't it? That brat will become even more difficult to deal with after 2 years. You can't even deal with him yourself. You really think Tyrone and the others have a chance of killing him?" "Don't be naive," Troy explained. Rochelle was silent. Zen was truly a lucky person. She had a strong premonition that it would be impossible for her to kill him. In the Time Sea Forbidden Land, she had tried to kill Zen so many times, but he had narrowly escaped from death each time. The Dongfang clan's plan was probably their best way of ensuring his death. "As long as the Luo clan doesn't get the inheritance in the debate venue this time, we will not have any worries. This sacrifice is worth it," added Troy. As soon as he finished speaking, a unique aura spread out from the sunwrist tree. The calm expression on Troy's face was replaced by one of surprise and disbelief. Buzz. At this moment, Rochelle felt the invisible binds around her disappear. She was able to gather her killing intent again. "Has the truth of godly way in the non-combat zone been removed?" "No," Troy shook his head. "The truth of godly way has been diverted. The truth of goodwill and malice. The captain of the ship is making a move." What does this mean?" Walton asked with a puzzled look. Troy's face darkened. If no one had succeeded in the debate venue, the captain wouldn't have made a move. Troy knew no less about the debate venue than the Sword Clan. He knew that the debate venue was controlled by the other Shore Realm warrior, but he didn't know how to succeed in the debate venue. "You mean someone has gotten the inheritance of the debate venue? Is it one of our people?" Rochelle asked with concern. Troy shook his head. "I'm not sure yet. We can only wait for them to come out." Even Troy couldn't stand it anymore. His goal was simple. He didn't want anyone to obtain the inheritance of the debate venue. This result would have a great impact on the Dongfang clan's next strategy to cope with the situation. It had taken the Dongfang clan a lot of effort to summon a fiend in the debate venue. There was no way things could have turned out this way. That was why, so far, he had been absolutely confident that things would go according to the Dongfang clan's plan. But now, things seemed to be developing in a direction beyond his control. Chapter 2083. Change Harper's mind. Tension filled the air. "This is the aura of a real powerful warrior at the other shore realm," Zen declared as he stared blankly at Harper. Known as a powerful master, Harper's gaze alone could push anyone into fear or even submission. He raised his sword, laid it flat slowly, and then pointed its tip towards Zen. "Leave the masters in the source world aside first. Some of the masters who hide in the divine land are more powerful than me. Are you brave enough to resist them? Or are you brave enough to resist me?" There was no time for responses as the aura of the truth of goodwill and malice immediately covered Zen. It was known that the aura of a true god was so strong that it made people feel that it was actually real. Harper's aura, however, was truly real. Zen appeared as if he was wrapped in a crystalline layer of water. The layer of water looked deceptively soft, but it was quite strong. For a moment he seemed to fall into the winter, but in the next, it looked like he sank to the depths of the roaring flames. It went on for a while, and the two sensations alternately tortured the life out of Zen. In reality, his current situation was a test. Based on Harper's facial expression, he could tell that he really did not want to hand over the shadow-bearing sword to him. Even if Chiyu was his grandfather, Harper still refused to give him the sword, at least for now. It was because there was something that Harper still wanted to verify. As for Zen, he couldn't do anything but do his best to resist Harper's powerful aura even if it was almost killing him. His face quickly became white as a sheet while his soul trembled constantly. Even his heart was shaking. Lorena and Yan didn't look too good either, especially Yan. Mother, Zen is just a low-rank true god. His soul isn't weaker than mine, but he can't resist such an aura, Yan said anxiously. Since she was under Lorena's protection, she didn't have to undergo such a thing. Yet, Lorena just frowned and said nothing. It was true that she could help Zen make those requests, but she knew that there were some difficulties that he had to face by himself. If he couldn't even pass this small test, then there was no point for her to help him too much. After all, they were in a world where strength decided everything. No matter how good the chance, the powerful the patron, and how strong the foundation, all of those were simply additional reinforcements. Zen had to progress step by step with his own strength. Therefore, Lorena coldly ignored Yan's worry and turned to Zen. Come on Zen, she thought. This man is so powerful. No wonder he has never taken the holy beings seriously. His power really is one level stronger than that of the holy beings. But I'm sure I can make it through. Zen choked out. He suddenly closed his eyes and began to quietly activate the truth of cultivation nature. The truth of cultivation nature. Harper was a powerful man at the other shore realm, so it was clear that his understanding of the truth of godly way was not something that Zen could comprehend. After all, he had used the truth of goodwill and malice to cross the sea of truth and reach the other shore. The only thing was, Zen hadn't completely grasped the truth of godly way. Nevertheless, it was impossible for Harper to use all the truth of godly way to test Zen. He knew when to stop. The truth of cultivation nature is to take advantage of the situation and conform to the changes in everything in a natural way. In essence, the truth of goodwill and malice was about the constant alternation of two kinds of auras. All that Zen had to do was follow the rhythm of the alternation. He had once experienced such a feeling from the cyan stone tablet. Still, the pressure at that time was far less powerful than it was now. Of course, both situations were quite different. His goal on the cyan stone tablet was to climb to a greater height, while as for now he needed to resist. He continued to do so when something suddenly clicked in his brain. No, I shouldn't resist, but adapt. The power of the truth of goodwill and malice constantly poured into him like two completely different torrents. In turn, he himself also changed with the torrents. Look, Zen's aura has become so unique. Yan exclaimed as she stared at her brother in shock. Beside her was Lorena, who was equally surprised. He can adapt himself completely in such a short time. She beamed with pride. If Zen wasn't strong enough to resist the torrents, then he learned how to swim in them to avoid being drowned. Like a baby in water, he learned how to tread the torrents after a bit of struggling. Soon enough, he opened his eyes again. He turned to Harper and gazed steadily at him. I have never lost my courage. I once fought powerful warriors at the Soul Sea realm and the supreme lords in the universe. I even fought the holy beings in the divine land. You may be very powerful, but time will fill in the gap between us. And, I believe that. You believe what? Harper interjected. There was a trace of admiration in his old eyes when he heard Zen's clear and determined words. I believe that it won't be too long, Zen finished with a smile. At that moment, the aura around him immediately disappeared. Harper looked at Lorena and smiled. Amazing, you didn't teach Zen, but his heart is so strong. Mike has done a good job. He applauded. He had seen his fair share of miscreants in his long life. Furthermore, he had more experience in the 9 Li race than Lorena. Even in the source world, there were only few young men who had such a strong will. With a wave of his hand, Harper gently tossed the bronze long sword to Zen and asked, I want to know how your father trained you. Lorena's ears perked up as even she was quite interested in this question. As both Zen and Yan were sent to the universe, Lorena did not know what had transpired there. She only guessed that Zen would have all the resources from Mike. Meanwhile, a heavy feeling washed over Zen as he took the shadow-bearing sword in Harper's hand. The sword was about as heavy as the great weighty sword. A gentle smile spread across his face. He had experienced so many transformations in his life, but he didn't answer. Zen has experienced a lot, Yan muttered solemnly as she looked at her brother. She was the one who understood Zen's struggles in the past the most. After Harold had taken her to the divine land and when she had learned the truth, she also felt that her father had gone too far. It could be said that Mike had used all kinds of methods to push Zen to the edge of life and death and to squeeze every inch of his strength and courage. Lorena learned from Yan that Mike had organized a relentless family, where Zen was tormented. My husband was too cruel. How could he treat his son like that? She lamented. Ha ha, Mike is really heartless. Harper chuckled and sighed. Because of such training, Zen's will is stronger than anyone else's. He is not only stronger than the members of the wealthy clans in the divine land, I'm afraid that even I am inferior to Zen in some ways. Truly, will had nothing to do with strength. The reason Harper had been slacking was that his mood had changed. After he lost his confidence, he became hopeless, simply watched the divine land fall apart and did not offer to help. Now, the confident young man in front of him changed his mind. Chapter 2084, Departure. Staring at the shadow-bearing sword in Zen's hand, Harper went on, you seem to have cultivated more than 90% of the truth of cultivation nature, and you have a good understanding of martial arts. However, the sword has been with me for many years, and it already has the spirituality. If you want to wield it, you must be well versed with the truth of goodwill and malice. Zen nodded in reply. There was nothing special about the long sword in Zen's hand except for its weight. It looked like an ordinary long sword. It must be driven by the truth of goodwill and malice. He bowed to Harper and said, I hope you will give me some advice. It's not a big deal. The comprehension of the truth of godly way depends on one's own abilities. You can only get as much of it based on your own understanding. The pursuit of the truth of cultivation nature is natural. It could cooperate with almost any cultivation method, but the truth of goodwill and malice is different. Harper said as he tapped his finger in the air. Immediately, the scenery around the deep well began to change. The streaks of time quickly intertwined on the wall of the well, leaving dense characters on it. The words that appeared on the wall were, you have a malice, then all the people in the world will be your enemy. You have a goodwill, then you will benefit the whole world. Is this the mind method of the truth of goodwill and malice? Zen's eyes widened. When he was reading the words quietly in his mind, an indescribable feeling of discomfort arose in his heart. The words needed to be fully comprehended before he could absorb them bit by bit. However, Zen thought to himself, since Harper and Mother are from the source world, they should be considered extraordinary creatures. Can't an extraordinary creature use Sanskrit words directly? Buzz. In no time, the words on the well wall flew down and gathered in front of Zen, forming a small scroll. Zen picked up the scroll, and asked, Master Harper, there's one more thing that I'm not sure of. Are you using the same language as ours? Don't the extraordinary creatures use Sanskrit? Every race had its own distinctive words and language. The language and words of each race, much like the demon knight race and other races, were different. But the most essential culture was the human language and words. Zen believed that these languages and words were transmitted from the divine land to the universe. When Mike built the evolutionary universe, he had transferred these cultures to the evolutionary universe. For example, Zen had built his own inner world, so the languages and customs, and the languages that the evil god and the others used were the same as that of the humans in the divine land. Zen's question made Harper chuckle. Sanskrit is not that easy to decipher even for us. Your mother knows that too. Lorena nodded, adding, yes. The language we are using was created by a man called Kangjia in the source world. It is being used widely. The 9 Li people have been living with these words, which have been transferred to the divine land. The words you have learned in the evolutionary universe have also been inherited from the source world. I see. A look of surprise appeared on Zen's face. He had always believed that the words they used commonly were from the divine land, but he never imagined that they might be inherited from the source world. As for Sanskrit, that is derived from the words of the chaos ancient god, explained Lorena. That's weird. Is it difficult to decipher it even in the source world? How could Jeffrey read Sanskrit so easily? Zen asked curiously. What? Harper's eyebrows suddenly shot up. Who is this Jeffrey? He can read Sanskrit? Seriously? Lorena was so astonished by these facts that she was babbling now. Mother, Jeffrey is your grandson, Zen announced. My grandson. Lorena was beaming with pride. She didn't expect to hear that she had a grandson. Harper asked anxiously, Zen, did you say Jeffrey could easily understand Sanskrit? Harper stressed the word, easily. Zen nodded, feeling a bit confused at his question. Harper suddenly raised his hand, and a bright, golden word flashed in his palm, which was a Sanskrit word with a unique shape. Do the Sanskrit words look like this? He asked. That's correct, Zen nodded. Jeffrey deciphered the truth of cultivation nature from the Sanskrit words, otherwise, I couldn't have mastered the truth of cultivation nature to such a high level. Zen himself had also been curious about Jeffrey's rare talent. Harper and Lorena looked at each other, their eyes full of concern. The words of the Chaos Ancient God can't be deciphered by ordinary people even in the Source world, said Lorena in a somber tone. Only those who have the Ancient God eyes have the ability to decipher Sanskrit. And those who have the Ancient God eyes in the Source world are extremely rare. So does that mean Jeffrey has the Ancient God eyes? Zen blinked in disbelief. Yan, who was standing beside them, smiled proudly and said, Wow brother. Looks like my nephew is very powerful. I really must see him this time when we leave the debate venue. If you say that he can actually read the Sanskrit easily, he must have the Ancient God eyes. It's the only explanation. Moreover, if he can decipher the truth of cultivation nature, the level of his Ancient God eyes won't be low, remarked Harper, his eyes growing wider in fascination. One has the 1,000 Sanskrit land, one has the Ancient God eyes and the other has the inheritance of the shadow of Snake Goddess. Why didn't these bloodlines emerge until now? This is the will of the Chaos Ancient God. We will attain the final victory, said Lorena triumphantly. Maybe. Harper's eyes were full of expectation. If the 1,000 Sanskrit land that Zen possesses can indeed grow and become stronger, it certainly has the ability to resolve the present crisis. However, cultivating the 1,000 Sanskrit land requires a large number of spiritual darknesses, and you will need your mother's advice on your cultivation method. Lorena smiled faintly and said, That's for sure. Zen, Yan, you'd better follow Harold's suggestion after leaving the debate venue. But you'd better come to me when you have the chance. Zen knows where I will be hiding. All right, Zen agreed. Lorena walked up to Zen and Yan and hugged them lovingly. She was just an incarnation of fear and her real body did not know what had happened there. However, the light cocoon between Zen's eyebrows was recording everything, and Lorena would know when she met him again. As a mother, this was a precious memory for Lorena. Well, since you have taken what you want, and even the things that you shouldn't take, it's time for you to leave, said Harper waving his hand. It's time to say goodbye. Lorena smiled wistfully and kissed Yan and Zen on their foreheads. Mother. Yan embraced Lorena tightly. Although it was the first time she had seen her mother, the blood tie was unbreakable. Then, Lorena's body turned into little red dots and disappeared right before Yan's eyes. Chapter 2085. The results. Several figures rushed out from the enormous hole at the top of the sunrise tree. The group was led by Tyrone, Ellis, and some others. Because of Duke, they had all suffered major injuries. But before Edmund appeared, they all scattered like roaches and managed to escape the debate venue by sheer luck. Plop, plop. As soon as they fled from the hole, they landed on the surface of the sunrise tree, all of them panting with exhaustion. I thought I was going to die. Duke wanted to get himself killed. Fine, but he shouldn't have all of us die with him. HMPH. I'm sure he's already turned to dust. Now, Duke had replaced Zen as the man the top-rank true gods hated the most. After almost getting killed because of Duke, they managed to save their own lives, giving them a sense of narrow escape. After taking a good rest at the edge of the hole, they flew towards the heavenly sword divine city. Soon after they left, Reinhard emerged from the hole with 10 disciples of the sword clan behind him, the soybean-eyed guy and Enoch. We're back. After finally leaving the debate venue, the crowd wore huge smiles on their faces. While the sword clan lost one of their members, they at least got to help Zen and Yan meet their goal. Their trip to the debate venue was a nearly perfect experience in hindsight. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. These people also shot toward the heavenly sword divine city. In the hall, Marsh, Gibson, and Harold all looked quite relaxed. They already knew the result, after all. Although they weren't too sure what Zen and Yan would encounter with Lorena, they just assumed that she wouldn't do anything to harm her own children. However, both Troy and Rochelle looked pissed off. I heard that the Sword Clan has some kind of technique that allows you to see the situation within the sunrise tree. You should already know what happened in the debate venue, Rochelle pressed. But Marsh only grinned and said, I have no time to watch the younger generation's movements. They all have to rely on their own skills to succeed. The one who dared to play a trick has already met his doom. Troy's eyes twitched as he heard this. Marsh was suggesting that the Sword Clan had already known the Dongfang clan's plot. Perhaps they had seen the fiend themselves. In the beginning, Troy was most worried about Duke not being able to enter the debate venue. If he died before getting there, all the Dongfang clan's preparations would have been for naught, but it was unlikely. Since Duke had entered the venue and successfully summoned the fiend, the top-ranked true gods would undoubtedly perish, Troy figured. But Harold's and Marsh's relaxed demeanor had Troy puzzled. Did the top-ranked true gods actually defeat the fiend and pass the debate venue? It was virtually impossible. Not willing to wait any longer, he led the other consummate true gods of the alliance of powerful clans to come here to ask about the situation. But Marsh didn't give any direct answers, of course. At this moment, a sudden roar was heard from outside the door. People started trickling in from the entrance. Tyrone. With her sharp eyes, Rochelle spotted Tyrone, badly injured. Those are serious wounds, aren't they? Pale and in pain, Tyrone stared at Troy with a look of grievance. Noticing Harold's and the Sword Clan members' presence, Tyrone knew to be sensible about the situation. Instead of complaining about Duke and the Dongfang clan, he said in a low voice, "I almost lost my life because of Duke." "How did he get you into trouble?" Troy asked anxiously. "Forget it," Tyrone said, waving his hand. "I won't hold him accountable. He won't come back anyway. Duke is stronger than you. Since you have come back, he must have survived. Where is he?" Troy asked further, needing to know what really happened in the debate venue. "We faced a fiend," Tyrone said, rolling his eyes and pouting. The words had Troy somewhat relieved, but he feigned surprise in front of the holy beings of the Sword Clan. "A fiend, then the others must have. They're dead," Tyrone interrupted him impatiently. The answer put a pleased glint in Troy's eyes. No matter what happened in the Sunrise Tree, so long as the others were all gone, he could consider his goal achieved. He cared nothing about the process, after all. But he didn't know that Tyrone's words were practically nonsensical. When they saw the fiend, they all ran away, after all. They had no clue what really went down. Harold and his group, however, had witnessed the whole thing. When they saw Troy pretend, they merely sneered and kept quiet. Soon after Tyrone and his companions returned, another group of people, including Reinhard, appeared at the door. Tyrone and Ellis seemed shocked out of their minds, as though they had seen real ghosts. You also ran away?" Tyrone stammered as he asked. He and his companions had wrongly assumed that they were the only survivors. It was quite a slap to the face to find out that most of the members of the Sword Clan had managed to return as well. Sensing the atmosphere in the hall, Reinhard offered a light smile. "We didn't run away." But Tyrone wasn't convinced and coldly asked, "Oh really? You didn't run away? Tell me, then, how you could have possibly survived against that fiend." "It's quite simple, really," Reinhard replied, still smiling. The same mysterious smile appeared on the faces of Enoch and the other Sword Clan members. "How did you make it?" Tyrone looked at Reinhard hesitantly as he asked. Even consummate true gods were staring at Reinhard anxiously, eager to hear his answer. Of course, they didn't care to hear how Reinhard survived, but they wanted to find out whether or not someone had obtained the debate's inheritance. "Kill that fiend," Reinhard laughed. Tyrone's expression suddenly changed at this news. It brought a frown to Troy's face as well. "You killed the fiend? How? You're all merely top-ranked true gods." Because the two holy beings of the Sword Clan were there, Reinhard wasn't the least bit afraid of Troy. He merely shrugged in response before leading the disciples of the Sword Clan up to the hall. As he walked, he said, "It wasn't us who killed the fiend, but he died indeed. Duke stirred up trouble and got himself killed. Believe it or not." To this, the faces of Troy, Rochelle, Sean, and Walton all grew dark. It wasn't easy to tell if Reinhard was telling the truth or not. They could only exchange looks and read each other's eyes, assessing their worries. Zen and his sister hadn't shown up yet. After all, the rest were hoping that the two would perish in the debate venue so that they wouldn't have to deal with the pair ever again. But barely 5 minutes passed when another two figures appeared at the door of the hall. They were none other than Zen and Yan. After spending much time in the deep well, with Harper's help, they were covered in a layer of green liquid, allowing them to fly all the way up the Sunrise Tree. Because of this, they didn't lag too far behind Reinhard and the others. Chapter 2086, Dealing Method. All of a sudden, Zen appeared in the Great Hall with Yan, deflating all the hope that Troy, Rochelle and the others had had. They glared at Zen as if they wanted to swallow him up. A faint smile hung on Zen's face as he responded to Rochelle's gaze. "You're disappointed, aren't you?" A murderous look appeared on Rochelle's face. Unfortunately, the debate venue had returned to normal, so her murderous intent was once again suppressed by the truth of goodwill. "You've gotten the inheritance of the debate venue?" Troy asked while staring at Zen. Is it necessary for me to answer your question? Zen raised his eyebrows slightly. Although he was just a low-rank true god, everything from the way he spoke to the way he behaved made it seem like he was on the same level as the consummate true gods. Troy couldn't help but take offense, but he took a deep breath, relaxing his expression before calmly replying with a question of his own. Do you think that you've already won? At least we've won the first step. Yan, who was standing beside her brother, raised her little face high, her eyes flashing with a sharp luster. Troy smiled coldly and turned to look at Harold. Let's hope that you're still this lucky next time. Then, turning to his allies, he said, let's go. Under his lead, Rochelle, Walton, all the consummate true gods, and the top-ranked true gods from the Alliance walked out of the hall. When Troy reached the gate, Marsh suddenly called after him. Say hello to Nicholas for me. Please forgive us for our poor reception. Troy turned to Marsh and nodded. No problem, I will report it to him. Thanks for your meticulous treatment. Then he left the hall in a huff. Returning to the time sea from the Heavenly Sword Divine City was very convenient. One only needed to pass through the transmission array. After the group of people in the alliance of the wealthy clans left, Marsh looked at the main entrance of the hall and said with a faint smile, Nicholas is going to explode with anger this time. Harold nodded. Nicholas is not one to back down. I'm afraid that the Dongfang clan will try to take revenge on the Sword clan. As the second-ranked powerful clan in the Divine Land, the Sword clan had been on good terms with the Dongfang clan for many years and had never interfered with each other's business. But this time, by supporting and protecting the Luo clan, the Sword clan had clearly taken a stand against the Dongfang clan. Humph, if it weren't for Nicholas's crazy plan, our Sword clan would never have provoked him. He wants to destroy the Divine Land. Humph, he should ask all the people in the Divine Land what they think, Gibson said coldly. These holy beings of the Divine Land knew more or less about the dispute between the Luo clan and the alliance of the wealthy clans. Before, most of the wealthy clans had been indifferent to it. After all, no one had been willing to offend the Dongfang clan for the sake of the Luo clan. However, they had never expected that the dispute between the two could actually affect the fate of the entire Divine Land. The Sword clan had only recently found out from Harold how mad and unreasonable Nicholas had become. He was actually ready to destroy the entire Divine Land just for his own ambitions. Since it was a matter of life and death for the entire Divine Land, the Sword clan, as the second-ranked powerful clan in the Divine Land, had no choice but to take a stand and solve the problem. No matter what, we should be careful. Nicholas is an unpredictable man. A worried expression appeared on Marsh's face. The Sword clan had messed with the Dongfang clan, which meant that they had messed with all the clans in the alliance. And according to what Harold had said, there was a powerful man who was at the other shore realm behind Nicholas. Don't worry, Master Marsh. No matter what, I don't think the Dongfang clan will have the advantage, said Harold lightly. The Moon clan has already said they won't stand on the side of the Dongfang clan. And if they learn about Nicholas's ambitions, they will probably make the same decision that you did. The path that Nicholas had chosen was equivalent to standing against the entire Divine Land. The Moon clan had the same resources as the Sword clan and it was the third-ranked wealthy clan. The Moon sect, the War God Hall, and the mysterious soul building each had a holy being in charge, so the Moon clan was also a force to be reckoned with. At present, Harold's goal was very clear. He was trying his best to rope in more powerful forces in the Divine Land to stand on his side so that he wouldn't find himself in a one-on-one fight. Let's wait and see. Marsh nodded. People at the same level as them could see through the nature of things in a short time. Since they couldn't predict Nicholas's next move now, they would just have to wait quietly and be prepared for anything that came their way. Our next step will be up to Zen, said Harold, staring at Zen. Entering the sun? Zen asked. Right, Harold nodded. After obtaining the sun-resisting umbrella, Zen had become the new captain of the Divine Land. When, with a gleam in his eyes, Harold replied, at dusk tomorrow. So soon? Zen asked curiously. A trace of a helpless smile appeared on Harold's face as he shook his head. Actually, it is already very late. The speed at which the Divine Land is falling keeps increasing. At this rate, we'll reach a point where it will be too difficult to save the Divine Land even if we manage to change the direction. If a huge object fell down, it would take a lot of time and effort to lift it back up. And the Divine Land was like a ship that was unimaginably large. They were indeed running out of time. Okay, Zen nodded. He had learned a lot of things from his mother, so he had no doubts about Harold's arrangement. Troy and the others returned to the Sword clan's floating island through the transmission array. All of them had sour expressions on their faces and kept silent. They had suffered a crushing defeat this time. After leaving the Sword Clan's floating island, Troy traveled through thick clouds and returned to the floating island of the Dongfang clan, which was the first-ranked floating island on the Time Sea. Look, it's Master Troy. Master Troy. Troy, you're back. When Troy entered the floating island of the Dongfang clan, all the members of the Dongfang clan bowed respectfully to him. But Troy just walked past them without saying a word. He was heading toward the East Hall on the floating island with a gloomy expression on his face. What's wrong with him? Why hasn't Duke come back with him? They went to the non-combat zone together, right? Did they fail? So what if they failed? When have they ever succeeded in recent years? Why is he so upset? The disciples of the Dongfang clan didn't know any details, but they knew that something was wrong from the look on Troy's face. When Troy reached the entrance of the East Hall, he stopped and closed his eyes, revealing a trace of exhaustion on his face. It wasn't until minutes later that he entered. Chapter 2087. The Sun Essence Flames. The East Hall was built with a particularly distinctive translucent glaze. When one stepped on the ground, the impact triggered ripples, as though one was walking on a dense lake. When Troy entered the hall, he walked along a long, thin corridor. A small door waited at the end of the hall. Behind the door, he saw a huge gray chair in front of him, Nicholas lying on his back atop it. He held a cup of diluted blood-like wine in his hand. A sweet, charming smell from the liquid filled the hall. Plop. Before this sight, Troy knelt to the ground, saying nothing. I thought we were bound to win this time, but I was mistaken, Nicholas said lightly. It's all my fault, Troy said, bowing his head. Hearing that, Nicholas looked down at Troy and sneered. You merely sent Duke to the debate venue. You couldn't even see the whole process, so you can't be blamed for that. As the leader of the Dongfang clan's group, Troy couldn't take any real part in the debate. But he couldn't help but blame himself, not willing to accept the result. The Dongfang clan's plan was absolutely flawless from beginning to end. Until now, Troy couldn't tell what went wrong. How could the candidates escape in the face of the fiend? It was too disconcerting to him. Looking at Troy with his head bowed, Nicholas stepped onto the ground and stood up, his burly figure rising from the chair. He poured the wine onto the ground and said calmly, Harold may have known of our plan. I don't understand. Troy shook his head. The fear incarnations that the candidates summoned in the debate venue held their own memories. What if they summoned strong fear incarnations to serve them? Nicholas asked. Something clicked in Troy's head when he heard this. Although I don't know exactly who they summoned, that's the only explanation that makes sense, Nicholas continued. The captain of the ship is standing opposite us. If he discovered Zen's identity and voluntarily gave him the inheritance, you couldn't stop him. So there's no need to blame yourself. It would be good if we succeeded, but don't be too worried about the failure now. Get up. Yes, sir, Troy said as he stood up promptly. Nicholas's words comforted him somehow. The master at the other shore realm was on Zen's side. If he wanted to give Zen his inheritance at the debate venue, who could stop him? But this time, the Sword Clan, Troy started. Nicholas stopped him with a sneer. The Sword Clan will take Harold's side sooner or later, but they're faster than I expected them to be. Since they can't wait, that's not on me. Some changes are bound to happen. A full day in the Divine Land consisted of 24 hours. In the early morning, the great ball of fire known as the sun would rise gradually from the east, illuminating every corner of the land. Then, it flew past the Divine Land extremely quickly. When the sun reached just above the Time Sea, it meant noontime in the Divine Land. A few hours later, the sun would reach the far west above the sunrise tree, indicating dusk. In the Heavenly Sword Divine City atop the sunrise tree within the non-combat zone, Marsh, Gibson, Harold, and the others were looking up into the sky like statues. Upon seeing the sun's afterglow, Marsh broke the silence. It's time. I'll take you up. Zen only nodded. Then, he grabbed Zen's hand and with a flash, the two disappeared right before Harold's and Yan's eyes. Though Harold could fly into the air with Zen, as a consummate true god, he couldn't move as far as Marsh could. The sun in itself was a fast-moving fireball and he couldn't afford to miss the perfect timing. They were left with no choice but to let Marsh take Zen to the sun. Everything before Zen seemed to turn black before he was suddenly pulled up into the air. Whoosh, 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 what a strong gale. The wind roared past, blowing on his face like knives made of air. Even though he did have an extremely strong body, Zen could feel the gale leave thin white marks on his body. Now, the sun above his head was several times larger in his sight. Once again, pinpointing his position, Marsh continued to drag Zen through space. After the second spatial transference, Zen was now several times closer to the sun. When he looked down, he could see the entire non-combat zone. It seemed like a small, semicircular pool with the huge sunrise tree in the middle like some kind of octopus. Everything seemed incomparably small to Zen from such a great height. After Marsh moved with Zen through space for the third time, the burning flames turned into irregular sharp swords before falling from above. These were the sun essence flames. The flames were divided into 3 layers. But even the outermost layer alone was enough to burn everything to the ground. Ordinary true gods wouldn't have been able to withstand it. The two were still quite a long way from the sun. Though Marsh could withstand the flames, he was afraid that Zen couldn't. He created a halo in his hand, ready to cover Zen's body with it. But right at this moment, Zen's body suddenly began glowing with tiny golden Sanskrit words. It seemed he was absorbing the sun essence flames. "You're refining your body with the flames." Marsh was completely astonished. "You're absorbing them." He himself didn't dare to absorb the sun essence flames for his own use. Even the holy beings couldn't tame the manic flames, but Zen was absorbing them continuously. There was a legend in the divine land saying that there was a huge palace in the sun. Anyone who lived there was qualified to control the divine land. In an era when the divine citizens remained ignorant, only the most exceptional true gods could become holy beings, and only a select few of them truly challenged the sun. In the end, they were all burned to ashes by the sun without exception. But because the holy beings could make themselves immortal through universes, they eventually recovered. Since then, no one ever dared try to get close to the sun. It was an absolute shock to Marsh to see Zen absorbing the sun essence flames so freely. Since Zen continued absorbing the flames, Marsh remained in the air, waiting for the other to absorb as much as he wanted to. Chapter 2088, Whirlpool. Zen's entire body glowed golden from all the Sanskrit words written on his skin. Marsh stood and waited patiently. After 5 minutes, Zen's body slowly dimmed. His outline became more distinct and the aura he exuded was more refined. The scene intrigued Marsh. Absorbing the preternatural fire can make you become stronger. From a holy being's perception, it was apparent at first glance that Zen's body was far mightier than an ordinary true god's. For example, Zen's astonishing slash that he performed in the debate venue well proved his powerful strength. If an ordinary low-ranked true god made that move, their entire body would have collapsed before they even completed the strike. However, Zen's body had no problem standing up against such a force. The young man had shown so many incredible things that his incredibly tough physical body was often overshadowed and ignored. "Yes," he replied to Marsh with a nod. Marsh sighed, "I have never heard of such a magical method." Since Zen could adapt himself to the sun essence flame in the outermost layer, then he naturally would seize the opportunity to refine his body. He still had no idea as to what extent his body could be cultivated with the grand weapon refining method. Ever since entering the divine land, he found it really difficult to find suitable flames for his cultivation. The answer, fortunately, came to him from his mother, who told him that all cultivation methods related to Sanskrit were heritages left behind by the chaos ancient god. Thus, the grand weapon refining method's limit could very well go beyond the divine land. Its limit could be further explored in the future. Now Zen had to solve his problem. "I'll teleport you once again, but you'll have to rely on yourself afterward," Marsh told him. He then carried Zen and zoomed off once again. Phew. In the blink of an eye, the two of them traveled several million feet. They were high above and couldn't find any trace of the sunrise tree or the non-combat zone below. All Zen could see was a white, oval shape on the ground. The white was no doubt snow that had covered the place for the past few months. He noticed, however, that the circular sun had disappeared. The distance between him and the sun had gotten too close, so he could no longer see it fully. All he saw was a sea of fire. Sizzle. It was suspended above Zen's head vertically. The flames blazed and darted in all directions, painting a spectacular scene above him. Hoo. Rays of sun essence flame formed fiery red clouds that spiraled in the wind. There was a hint of caution on Marsh's face as he faced the sun essence flame. He raised a hand and pointed it to the air. Suddenly, an invisible sword intent shot out from his finger. "See, subdue." Splash. With his command, the aura of the area around them suddenly changed. Zen heard the sound of surging waves amidst the flames. There was a sense of desolation that stirred within him, feeling as if the sea had risen to meet him. This is the sword intent that Marsh has comprehended. It isn't a theurgy nor a godly way. He just managed to cultivate the sword intent to such a terrifying level. So powerful. Zen couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The sword intent served as a barrier against the fiery red clouds, so they could no longer do any harm to Marsh or Zen. In fact, they seemed to be drifting away from them in the waves of tide. I can only take you until here. I won't be able to withstand it if I continue going up, Marsh told him. Zen nodded and took out a flying sword from his space ring. Since he couldn't fly, he would have to rely on his flying sword for the rest of the way. As he stepped onto the sword, Zen also took out the sun-resisting umbrella he had obtained from the debate venue. The reason why Harper became the captain of the ship was because of this very umbrella. It was only by using such an item that one could get close to the huge fireball that was the sun. Boom! As soon as he opened it, a bright yellow light curtain immediately enveloped him and the flying sword. He knew he had to be careful now. It was going to be really bad if the flying sword, his only means of transportation, got melted off by the sun essence flame. I'll be going now, he said. Marsh nodded. We're all counting on you. With the sun-resisting umbrella on hand and the flying sword at his feet, Zen turned into a streak of light and rapidly flew away. A lot of thoughts ran through Marsh's mind as he watched Zen's retreating figure. Never had he thought that the fate of the entire divine land would rest on the shoulders of the younger generation. Nor did he expect that the destroyed Luo clan actually hid such powerful abilities. He was still undecided on whether he should stand on the Luo clan's side or not, but the inborn sense of responsibility the Sword clan had instilled in him obligated him to save the many lives that resided in the divine land. Zen quickly flew past the fiery red clouds. The light curtain of the sun-resisting umbrella protected him effectively. He did not feel hot at all, in fact, it was rather cool. It was indeed a magic weapon. However, despite the fact that the sun-resisting umbrella proved itself to be very effective, he still did not dare take the sun essence flame lightly. The fiery red clouds could not harm him, but they moved quickly and formed strong whirlpools. If he wasn't careful, he could easily fall into these whirlpools and get sent careening towards God knew where. After flying cautiously for more than an hour, Zen noticed more and more fire clouds surrounding him. He was now close to the middle layer of the sun. Not even holy beings would be able to bear the heat at this stage. The sun essence flame here is probably 100 times stronger than in the outer layer. If I lose the sun-resisting umbrella's protection here, I'd burn to ashes instantly. He thought to himself. He was also quite shocked by the fire clouds formed by the layers of the sun essence flame. Zen had no idea how the sun was formed and how it maintained such a powerful momentum despite burning in the sky for several divine eras. It was at that point that he truly felt insignificant. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A sharp, whooshing sound suddenly came from behind him. When he turned, tens of thousands of sun essence flame rays coalesced and now formed into a huge whirlpool. Damn, his expression changed and he immediately tried to fly to the other side. However, the whirlpool was too large. Had Zen been a consummate true god or a holy being, then he might have stood a chance. Unfortunately, he was only a low-rank true god and he was merely relying on a flying sword to fly. It was impossible for him to escape. Swish, swish. At that moment, Zen felt that there was a great force pulling him, as if he was a mere leaf that was sucked in by the whirlpool. He lost control of his body and whirled around crazily. Chapter 2089. The Creatures in the Sun. The whirlpool propelled Zen upwards at incredible speed. Throughout the whole process, Zen stood precariously balanced on the flying sword, trying to remain standing as his hands tightly gripped the sun-resisting umbrella. The speed is too great. Now Zen's speed had far exceeded his flying speed, even when he tried his best. The whirlpool thrust him all the way upwards to the sun above. The momentum built up for about 5 minutes as he was continually pushed higher into the air. Splash! In the raging sea of fire above his head, a huge flame wave was triggered and swept down towards him. I've finally arrived. The sun essence flames on the outermost and middle layers were merely the flames that left the sun's internal body. The sea of fire above Zen was the innermost layer of the sun. There was no time for Zen to think or even adjust his position to get a better stance on the flying sword. Holding the sun-resisting umbrella over his head, he plunged with tremendous force into the sea of fire. When he opened his eyes, he saw that everything around him was crimson-colored, as if he was inside a crimson sea. The burning whirlpool couldn't resist the sea of fire, and gradually it was absorbed into the flames, until it became smaller and smaller, finally dissipating completely. The internal area of the sun is vast. I don't know where the hall that Harper mentioned is, so all I can do is slowly look for it. Zen selected a direction at random and commanded the flying sword to slowly move ahead. There was no magma in the sea of fire, but a kind of purplish-red heat current ebbed and flowed like tides of the ocean. The heat current was very thick, almost becoming a burning liquid. It was probably the liquefied form of the sun essence flames. The energy contained in it was mind-boggling. After all, even if the holy beings were to touch it, they would instantly perish. As Zen continued to steer the flying sword across the fire sea, it was proving difficult for him to increase his speed. He could only slowly fly while looking around. He was probably only the second person to ever visit here, besides the captain of the ship. In such a terrible environment, there could exist no other creatures. This was some relief to him at least, as he did not relish having to fight in such a hostile environment. Keep moving up. Zen didn't delay or dilly-dally. 2 hours had already passed. 4 hours had now passed. Finally, 6 hours had passed, and still his search revealed nothing. He steered across the sea of fire for more than 6 hours in a row. But all that he could see was an endless red sea of fire, and the heat-shimmering vistas did not change at all. Although the sun-resisting umbrella was quite capable of isolating him from all the flames outside, Zen felt bored already, and he even grew a little impatient as he had never before had to stay in such a boring place for such a long time. This fireball is probably the size of a full region. It will take several years for me to locate that hall at my current slow speed. As he was hesitating, suddenly, an approaching sound could be heard closing in from behind. Zen was startled as he turned around. Outside the protective light curtain formed by the sun-resisting umbrella, a swarm of fist-sized shapes were gathering together. Under such high temperatures, he had been unable to release his spiritual sense, for once his spiritual sense left the light curtain, it would have been incinerated to ashes by the high temperatures raging beyond the light curtain. So Zen had not noticed that these small objects were approaching. What the hell are they? How can they survive in such a hellish environment? Astonishment was etched all over Zen's face. Everything, not to mention the holy beings, would be instantly cremated should they enter the sun. Ordinary fierce beasts and any other creatures would be destroyed here in the sun. What could these shapes be? Zen had never even considered that there could be creatures existing here in the sun. These fist-sized objects appeared to be creatures with oval heads, and their left arms ended in large pincers. They each looked like an absurdly twisted kind of shrimp. Despite being funny-looking, they didn't seem at all afraid of the burning sun essence flames. Unfortunately, Zen did not dare to open the light curtain. Otherwise, he would really have wanted to reach through and grab a few of the strange shrimps and take them back with him. The shells of these beasts, which could clearly resist the sun essence flames, must be made of incredibly hardy materials and would be quite rare. But then again, considering that the shrimps were happily living here in the sea of fire, their temperature might be equal to that of the sun essence flames. Even if Zen could catch them, he might lose a hand in the process of trying to touch them. Following after Zen, the little shrimps snapped at the light curtain again and again with their pincers. Thump, 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 these little creatures want to pierce through the light curtain and come inside. Zen frowned, as he realized this might not be the best idea. If the light curtain was interrupted, he would be instantly burned into ashes and disappear forever. Go away, shoo, Zen slapped against the light curtain, trying to dissuade his tiny pursuers. Thump. The light curtain vibrated heavily, and the strange shrimps scattered, but soon they rushed forward again and stuck to the light curtain with fierce determination as they punched the light curtain with their pincers. Zen tried to drive the shrimps away a few times, but the shrimps soon discovered that Zen could only intimidate them, so they stopped fleeing. The number of these shrimps that gathered around Zen had increased, and now there was a whole swarm thumping at the light curtain. This is troublesome. A wry smile momentarily flashed on Zen's face. Soon after, the light curtain formed by the sun-resisting umbrella was covered by about 400 shrimps, almost completely obscuring Zen's view ahead. The strange shrimps were not powerful enough to break the light curtain, and therefore they didn't really pose a threat. However, Zen had already been moving slowly in the sun. Now his speed had slowed to a snail's pace due to the cumbersome shrimps. Feeling annoyed, Zen suddenly shook the sun-resisting umbrella again. The light curtain shook and bounced some shrimps off, but they didn't fear this and simply rose from the heat currents to stick to the curtain once more. Zen was now becoming even more worried. Just as he felt a sense of despair, through the gap between these strange shrimp bodies, he suddenly saw thin shadows darting towards him at incredible speeds. Fish are coming. Huge fish of 6 or 7 feet long dashed towards him, their bodies curving as they swam. These fish were almost an adult's height, and they soon began circling around Zen. They opened their mouths and grabbed the strange shrimps, swallowing them in one gulp. These strange shrimps are food for the fish. Zen was stunned to witness this weird drama. It seemed that there were more than just these two kinds of creatures living in the sea of fire. At least it appeared to form a complete food chain. The big fish had an excellent appetite. Soon, they had devoured all the shrimps that had been attached to the light curtain. Perhaps it was because they were now interested in Zen that they didn't leave. Like the shrimps, they began to use their sharp mouths to bite the light curtain. But soon, Zen suddenly became aware that the light above him had darkened. At the same time, the big fish gathered around the light curtain all swished their tails and fled in all directions. When Zen raised his head, he was confronted with the view of a gigantic whale, which was a few 100,000 feet long arching above his head. There were 2 dark green flames burning in the gigantic whale's eyes, and faint flames were spawning all over the outer layer of its skin. As soon as the gigantic whale arrived, it opened its cavernous maw and swallowed the big fish whole. The fish within an area of thousands of feet were sucked into its mouth with a maelstrom of force. Zen was also within this area, and he was unable to escape. He felt a huge gravitational force passing through, and he was instantly being sucked into the body of the whale together with the big fish. Together, they sank into the darkness within the whale. Chapter 2090, Palace. Even within the whale's belly, the swirling darkness was at a boiling high temperature. Zen was unable to set aside the sun-resisting umbrella since he still needed its protection, so all that he could do was to stay put and watch what happened around him. Fortunately, the protective light curtain from the sun-resisting umbrella was truly solid, although Zen and the curtain were being violently thrown about in the giant whale's body. But as long as Zen held the sun-resisting umbrella tightly in his grasp, the protective curtain could not be broken. Assured of this knowledge, Zen felt somewhat relieved. Splash! As soon as Zen managed to focus on examining the world within the whale, he became aware of a creepy feeling under his feet. The slow convulsive shivers felt like the peristalsis of some massive body part. With the sun-resisting umbrella in his hand, he continued to roll head over heels into the depths of the whale's inner darkness. He realized that he might be traveling in the whale's esophagus. When Zen finally managed to find some stability and rise to his knees, he saw a flickering cyan light up ahead. Cyan flame. Zen's attention was instantly roused. At the same time, he saw some of the big fish being sucked into the cyan flame. The gigantic whale had no teeth. Instead, it just swallowed both the fish and Zen whole into its stomach. As a result, and fortunately for Zen, they reached the whale's gut alive, and were not chomped into fish bait. But when the fish tumbled into the cyan flame, their bodies began to twist madly as if they were in agony. The tenacious fish bodies rolled and bounced in the flame. Soon, Zen saw that these big fish were being burned alive by the flame. They began to sizzle and pop and soon melted little by little, leaving behind only fish bones and triangular heads. As the burned fish corpses sank into the cyan flame's depths, even the bones gradually disintegrated. As the cyan flame in the whale's body more powerful and intense than the sun essence flame, Zen was both surprised and awed. These big fish had been merely able to survive in the sun essence flame. With such specially resilient bodies, they should not be afraid of any type of flame. However, they were actually consumed and turned into nothing by the cyan flame. No, this can't be right. The sun essence flame is supposed to be the strongest fire in the divine land. The cyan flame shouldn't be more powerful than that. The cyan flame is only equivalent to the gigantic whale's intestinal juices, and here it is used to digest the fire-resistant gigantic fish. The cyan flame might have evolved from this severe environment over countless divine eras. Zen thought. Zen's face became somewhat fretful. I wonder if this light curtain is strong enough to block the cyan flame. As if summoned, Zen felt another powerful peristalsis wave under his feet, which lifted him up once again, sending him falling toward the cyan flame's burning light. Falling along with him there were dozens of big fish and numerous fist-sized shrimps. Splash! The liquid-like cyan flame burned so hot and it constantly fluctuated around Zen. Soon the big fish and shrimps began sizzling all around Zen as they were melted and rapidly dissolved by the cyan flame. Zen looked at the light curtain, feeling somewhat nervous. Just hold on, Zen prayed fervently in his heart. A few seconds later, the light curtain still didn't show any signs of failing. Zen heaved a sigh of relief. What the hell kind of place was this? Even powerful masters at the other shore realm couldn't possibly have survived here without this sun-resisting umbrella for protection, let alone holy beings. As he thought of this, a question popped into his mind. It was only in a palace of the sun that the ship, called the Divine Land, could be controlled. The sun-resisting umbrella was the key to gaining entrance to the palace. Without it, how could anyone possibly hope to control or steer the ship? Neither Harper nor his mother had told him about this matter. For the time being, Zen couldn't find an answer to this dilemma. Perhaps the Yellow Emperor guards had used some other method to affect the direction of the Divine Land's flight. After all, Harper had already lost his ability to enter the sun. Zen allowed himself to become immersed in the puzzles and conjectures that raced in his mind as he waited patiently in the whale's stomach. From time to time, with a loud roar, loads of big fish, small fish, and more of the weird shrimps were quickly gulped into the whale's stomach and digested by the burning flame. This gigantic whale certainly has a huge stomach, and an appetite to match. Zen sighed. He had waited here in the roiling stomach for several hours now, and during this time, the gigantic whale had been constantly feeding, consuming more and more food. After sighing, Zen began to become worried. Since Zen was waiting here in the stomach where the food was being digested, he would probably be fully digested and excreted in the end. This embarrassing way left no doubt that he would die then. But the problem now was that the protection of the light curtain meant there was no way that the whale could digest him. Something that cannot be digested. Zen's eyes flashed as a brilliant thought occurred to him. All living creatures would vomit if they swallowed something disagreeable that they couldn't digest. The foreign matter would then be expelled from their bodies. Since that was the case, Zen jumped up on the flying sword and shot upwards at best speed. Bang! He smashed heavily into the stomach wall over his head. Evaluating this impact, Zen took advantage of the situation and continued to charge down. Come on! Inside the stomach space, surrounded by the soft stomach walls, Zen jumped up and down and madly dashed back and forth, slamming into the stomach lining. The cyan flame also danced around, following Zen. However, the flame was unable to break through the light curtain that was enveloping Zen, and it could not hurt him at all. The gigantic whale was blissfully swimming in the sea of fire, devouring all creatures in its path with a loud noise. This massive creature was the king of this sea of fire. Creatures at the top of the food chain had no enemies and knew no fear. Today, it had eaten something strange, but it did not care. Anything that was swallowed into its stomach would eventually be digested. But this time proved to be the exception. The whale suddenly felt a pang of discomfort in its body, and intense pain in its stomach. Even though it was not very intelligent, the gigantic whale instantly realized that it had eaten something not digestible, and it regretted having swallowed that strange creature. Feeling the great pain, its huge body began twisting, and its stomach began to shrink violently. Zen, who was still dashing around inside the whale's body, also sensed the change. The space around him began to contract rapidly. Okay, now's the time. Zen held the sun-resisting umbrella tightly in his hands while standing at the ready on the flying sword. As soon as he readied his position in the air, he felt a tremendous force building under his feet, which violently shot him out. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He tumbled about as if caught in a windstorm and quickly passed through the dark interior of the whale's esophagus and finally saw the light of the sea of fire ahead. I'm being chucked out. Zen quickly stabilized himself on the flying sword with a deft move of his tiptoes. After spitting Zen out, the giant whale did not depart. Instead it stared at Zen with its big eyes. Probably it wanted to make a mental note of what Zen looked like so that it would not make the mistake of swallowing such a strange thing again. Then the whale turned and dived down into the sea of fire with its massive tail sending out fiery ripples. It was not until the whale had left that Zen heaved a sigh of relief, slowly wiping his sweaty hands on his clothes. Zen had been an unwelcome tenant in the whale's stomach for several hours. He had no idea how far it had traveled with him inside, or even what distance it had covered in that time. Just as he turned around to check his surroundings, Zen saw a faint structure rise from the heat waves, not far from his upper right. That is. Zen narrowed his eyes, his eyebrows raising in anticipation. His face suddenly beamed with joy. There was a magnificent golden palace floating on the horizon. Chapter 2091. Looking down at the divine land. Zen continued to worry even after entering the sea of fire. The sun looked like a tiny fireball from afar, but it was massive from within. Zen had relied on a flying sword to wander in the sea of fire at a snail-like pace. At this rate, it would take a long time to find the palace. On the other hand, the whale was swimming at a speed that was many times faster than Zen's. After he was sucked into the belly for several hours, the gigantic whale swam for quite a long distance and finally took him to his destination. It was a blessing in disguise. Zen's heart beat faster as he looked up at the towering golden palace. But he did not hesitate. The flying sword under his feet moved upward and then towards the palace. The palace looked to be nearby, given Zen's vantage point, but it took him close to an hour to get close to it. What a magnificent palace! Zen exclaimed as he stood at the door of the palace, looking up at it in awe. The entire palace shone with a golden light. He didn't know what metal it was made of, but he was sure that it was definitely not gold. The soft metal would have long turned into liquid under the high temperatures surrounding it. He then controlled the flying sword so that he floated into the palace through the open door. The first part of the palace was also immersed in the sea of fire. But once he had moved forward for a distance, Zen noticed that several mysterious array textures had appeared on the ground. A curtain of faint yellow light spread out of the textures, blocking the sea of flames. This light is almost the same as the light released by the sun-resisting umbrella. Zen thought, his eyebrows going up in surprise. So when he approached the light curtain with the sun-resisting umbrella, the two light curtains connected to each other. This allowed Zen to go in without resistance. That was easy, Zen murmured in surprise. The palace had used the light curtain to create large, safe space. Zen stood in the palace, looking around as he carefully removed the sun-resisting umbrella. There was no burning sensation. That was how he knew that this place was safe. Even so, Zen remained vigilant. There were all kinds of creatures in the sea of fire. It was possible that there was something odd in the palace. As he walked through the palace's huge corridor, he used his spiritual sense to gauge what was happening around him. The palace looked luxurious but was empty from within. He crossed the corridor, went through 3 rooms, and finally came to the center of the palace. 7 interconnected rings were etched on the ground. And when he looked up, he saw that similar rings were present above him. Here it is. Zen smiled as he walked over and stepped onto the ring at the center. Apart from being wary of the presence of a few ferocious creatures, he was not worried about this being a trap. The sun was, after all, an extremely powerful barrier. And according to Harper, the sun-resisting umbrella was a key with which one could move easily through the sun. But without this key, not even a holy being could enter it. Naturally, there was no need to set any other trap. As soon as Zen stepped into the center, the 7 rings beneath his feet began to glow. With a telltale buzz, the ring at the center floated up to surround Zen's waist. The other rings came over Zen's feet and hands, and 2 rings piled on top of his head. What are these? Zen muttered, puzzled. As the 7 rings settled into place, the 2 rings above his head began to vibrate again. Zen felt his soul connect closely with these rings. All of a sudden, a white light exploded in his mind, flashing ominously like lightning. When he opened his eyes again, he saw something floating before him. What's this? He looked curiously at the oval-shaped, gem-like thing floating in the air. He stared at it for a long time, growing more surprised by the minute. He could hardly believe it. This is the divine land. Thanks to the rings, Zen's vision had seemed to become all-encompassing. He could actually see the entirety of the divine land. The divine land itself was unimaginably vast, spanning tens of trillions of miles from its easternmost point to its westernmost. Zen couldn't clearly see the details of the divine land. It was an oval-shaped gem that emitted a white luster. It's so beautiful, Zen gasped as he stared at this scene, stunned. After a long while, he turned to look at the other side. Pieces of giant brown clouds floated around the gem. These clouds were about 100 times larger than the divine land. The chaotic energy. Zen was familiar with the chaotic energy. There was plenty of chaotic energy in his own inner world. Besides, he had once seen Bromley's tourist records in the fairy palace. The images Bromley had recorded were exactly the same as what was happening in front of him. At the time, Zen didn't have an accurate concept of chaotic energy. All he knew was that the chaos was filled with a large mass of giant brown clouds. He didn't know how large these clouds were because there wasn't anything for comparison. But now that he could see the divine land and compare the two, Zen knew how huge the clouds formed by the chaotic energy actually were. He looked around for a while before returning his gaze to the divine land. Zen looked down and noticed that there were still small black dots on the surface of the divine land. There were not many, only about 50 to 60 of them. These dots look small, but they are actually huge. They are attached to the surface of the divine land. I think they are the universes of holy beings, Zen said to himself. From where he was standing, he could see the evolutionary universe, but could not tell which holy beings the other universes belonged to. Zen's gaze continued to travel down. It bypassed the divine land to finally find a gray world. Is that the bottom of the chaos? Zen was shocked. Harold, his mother, and Harper all had the same opinion about the divine land. The divine land was falling rapidly. And according to what Zen was seeing right now, it was true. Under the divine land was a grayish-white world, where the slender bones of beasts stood vertically like the fiend's teeth. Each bone was as long as the entire divine land. It was hard for Zen to imagine how huge these beasts had been when they were alive. The bottom of the divine land was huge and was where bones were buried. What the hell is this place? Chapter 2092, Control. Zen was shocked even though he knew how enormous the chaos was. But if a beast's bone was larger than the divine land, how huge must the giant beasts have been when alive? Zen had also seen huge creatures in the universe. For example, the ancestral dragon was thousands of miles long in its complete form. A few of the giant beasts even reached 10,000 or even 100,000 miles in length. But these giant beasts at the bottom of the chaos might be several 100 million miles long. How powerful might such creatures be? How had they perished and fallen down to the bottom of the chaos? Zen's gaze swept over the bones and saw that they were piled in disorder. They extended into far distance, and were blocked by the chaotic energy. The number of giant beasts that had died there was probably far beyond Zen's imagination. I don't know what's hidden at the bottom of the chaos, but if the divine land, the ship, really falls down, the living beings in the divine land will surely be annihilated. If such a huge divine land smashed into the chaos, it would cause a huge vibration before disassembling. The creatures of the divine land, on the other hand, could sense the ground cracking and the mountains collapsing. And in this process, 90% of creatures would be destroyed, with only a portion of the powerful ones being able enough to survive. Once the divine land broke, the chaotic energy would surge in madly. The poison of the chaotic energy would destroy the remaining creatures, and in the end, only a few dozens of the holy beings would be able to survive. Furthermore, once the divine land was broken, the universes attached to the divine land, which were also the inner worlds of holy beings, would also be affected. The universes would be destroyed. Murphy and Nicholas would also probably be affected, but Zen had no idea how they would deal with the situation. At such a speed, the divine land will probably crash in less than 10 years. No wonder Harold thinks that this is of such importance. 10 years was just a blink of an eye to the true gods. But how can I control the direction of the divine land? Zen pondered, frowning slightly. Harper hadn't given Zen any advice. He had only told him that he would gain all the knowledge he needed once he entered the sun. Since the divine land was also a ship, there was probably something like a helm that could control it. But the rings were the only things that could be used in this palace. He had worn these rings, but besides gaining a broader vision, he didn't seem to find anything special. Controlling the direction of the divine land wasn't even an option. There must be some secret to these rings. 4 rings were around his hands and feet. As he remembered this, Zen immediately closed his eyes. His soul trembled, beginning to release his spiritual sense. Like the tentacles of an octopus, the spiritual sense began to spread out towards the 4 rings. When it touched the rings, they began to tremble, buzzing incessantly. They are absorbing my spiritual sense, Zen exclaimed, shocked. Simultaneously, he felt that the 4 rings seemed to have integrated with him. The 4 rings seemed to have transformed into parts of his body, a fact that made him queasy. Is that so? Zen tried to move his arm, and lowered his right arm. The moment he moved his arm, the front end of the divine land, which was over 1 trillion miles long, began to sink. The divine land had been diving at a certain angle, and because of Zen's movement, it tilted even more greatly. At the same time, all the living beings in the divine land felt the tremors caused by the tilting of the divine land. The shock wasn't great, but it was obvious what had caused it. In the sunrise tree region, Yan stood on tiptoe at the edge of the tree as thick as an arm, looking up at the sky. A few hours later, all traces of the sun disappeared from the edge of the sunrise tree region and took her brother, Zen, to the other side of the chaos. It was now night in the sunrise tree region and they could only see the stars in the sky. Although the sun-resisting umbrella was protecting her brother, Yan was still worried. Even holy beings were prone to being burned to ashes by the sun essence flame in such a hot place. Her brother, on the other hand, was just a low-rank true god. But in this moment, she suddenly felt a faint vibration spreading out of the tip of the tree. She leaned forward, her body sliding onto a thin branch before she could control her movements. What is going on? Yan said, blinking in shock. Harold appeared on the tree trunk behind her, a faint smile on his face. Harold, what was that power? Yan asked curiously. The tilt had been slight but it had been unusually smooth, which meant that the power had had an influence over a large range. It had influenced the entire sunrise tree, causing it to lean over. It was just the divine land tilting, Harold laughed. It means Zen has succeeded. Zen made it? Yan asked, surprised. Harold nodded and said, but he seems to be going in the wrong direction. Yan was facing west on the divine land. If the land tilted in this direction, it would fall faster. Why is he going in the wrong direction? Yan asked curiously. Maybe he is exploring at the moment, Harold answered. The majority of the people in the divine land sensed this tilt, but most of them didn't take it seriously. Only a very small number of people understood that just a moment ago, the divine land had tilted at a great angle. But since everyone was in the divine land, they hadn't felt it too clearly. Some people were ecstatic and realized that someone was manipulating the direction of the divine land, in a bid to save the divine land. But some of them looked sullen. They had plotted for a long time, but now, Zen's actions had destroyed their plans. They were furious and dejected. Zen wasn't thinking all this as he was in the palace. Looks like these rings can control the direction of the divine land's flight. The front of the divine land had tilted dangerously when he had lowered his right hand. So Zen gently lifted his right hand, and the ring that surrounded his right hand floated upwards. This gesture caused the front of the divine land to lift and tilt upwards. It's done, Zen muttered excitedly, but the moment he lifted his hand, Zen realized that something was wrong. The divine land had only risen upward on one side. The other side remained tilted. He took some time figuring out the rules, and then slowly raised his left hand. The divine land had changed its direction completely, but it still maintained its fall. The divine land was, after all, a huge place and it had great inertia as it fell. It was not easy to completely change the situation in such a short period of time. But if it kept going at the present pace, the crash could eventually be avoided. Chapter 2093, The Red Light Band. Being able to change both the position and direction of the unimaginably enormous divine land was quite an incredible, unbelievable feat. Zen, however, was extraordinary and he accomplished it quite easily, merely by relying on several rings. Zen could only sigh with emotion and continue believing that the person who built the divine land had been ingenious enough to create such an exceptional method. At that very moment, Zen had an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. But what power does the divine land rely on in order to fly within the chaos? Zen wondered aloud. Among these 7 rings, 2 of them were above his head and would provide him with the vastest of views. 4 more small rings, located on both his hands and feet, controlled the position of the divine land during its flight. The final ring encircled his waist. This time, Zen released his spiritual sense without a moment's hesitation and infused it directly into the ring. As soon as Zen was closely connected with the ring around his waist, he immediately felt 4 waves of immense energy fluctuations. These energy fluctuations are so terrifying, he uttered to himself. Such tremendous energy fluctuations were completely above Zen's level of understanding. Describing how powerful the 4 energy waves were was beyond words. Zen was slightly shocked. And he clearly felt that these 4 forces came from the 4 corners of the divine land. The ray tree, sunrise tree, hidden tree, and the lofty tree. I can summon the 4 great divine trees, power with this ring. These forces could drive the entire divine land into movement. So, that explains it. The 4 divine trees are like this ship's driving power. Or, perhaps they are the ship's paddles. They provide constant energy in order to make it possible for the divine land to travel within the chaos. Zen thought. The Dongfang clan, Sword clan, and the Moon clan on the other hand, were a different story. Although the 3 clans had respectively occupied the ray tree, sunrise tree and the hidden tree, they had only obtained some support of the divine trees, and thus, couldn't use divine trees' power themselves. If one ever wanted to use the 4 divine trees, then they'd have to use the ring that was currently around his waist. After all the pieces of the puzzle had come together and he had a thorough understanding of what had occurred, everything seemed to become simple and clear. With the help of the ring around his waist, Zen released the 4 divine trees, energy all at once. It only took a few brief seconds before 4 streams of intense energy suddenly spurted from the 4 corners of the divine land directly into the lower part of the chaos. The 4 currents flowed in different colors. As they started to spurt, the falling speed of the divine land slowed down at a visible rate. What an incredibly powerful strength, Zen couldn't help but state. The 4 forces directly offset the divine land's falling inertia, causing it to halt in the chaos. At the same time, it rose very gradually. This is incredibly amazing, Zen said excitedly. He had officially accomplished the task that Harold had entrusted him with. A satisfied feeling washed over him. All he needed to do now was wait patiently. The easiest part of it all. However, Zen hadn't left the rings yet. He was still looking down at the divine land, watching attentively as it gradually rose. A split second later though, he suddenly perceived a red light flashing beneath him. When mortals looked up at the stars in the universe, they only saw them as big as a needle's head because they were too far away. In reality though, the stars were countless times larger than what they had imagined. Amongst the chaos, the distance had been magnified by at least 100,000 times, and could even be magnified 1,000,000 times. The red light was coming from the top of a beast's bone at the bottom of the chaos. Zen could see it easily now, with just a simple glance downward. The light was incredibly bright and shone radiantly. Zen continued looking at the light curiously and he noticed a red light band spreading out from it. This red light band rapidly spread toward the divine land at an unimaginably fast speed. What is that? How can it be traveling so fast? Zen's eyes widened as he spoke aloud. There was still a long distance dividing the divine land and the bottom of the chaos. And yet, in less than 5 minutes, this red light had crossed an endless distance. It was quickly sweeping toward the divine land. Zen couldn't figure out what this red light band was. That said, it didn't look like a good omen at all. Hurry up, run. Zen clenched his jaw and obeyed his own command. Through the ring around his waist, he pushed on the 4 divine trees in order to make them unleash even more energy. Unfortunately, for such a huge and unimaginable place like the divine land, increasing or decreasing speed was actually a very long process. No matter how Zen activated the extra energy, the divine land continued creeping upward at a snail's pace. And clearly, the speed at which the light band spread was much faster than that of the divine land. 2 hours later, Zen was still watching the scene play out before him, and the red light band finally circled the surface of the divine land. It was like a small snake that winded its way around the surface. After another 2 hours had passed, the red light band had completely circled around the divine land. Zen was helpless. He couldn't do anything at all except watch with his own 2 eyes. Before he had adjusted the direction of the divine land had been falling, and it probably had kept falling down for many divine eras. Over all that period of time, he had never seen any red light band before. He'd just adjusted the direction of the divine land in order to avoid it from crashing when the band of light suddenly appeared beneath him. It quickly entangled itself with the divine land. Was it a coincidence? Someone doesn't want the divine land to leave, huh? Zen muttered to himself. But what kind of creature could possibly exist at the bottom of all the chaos? What could be its purpose? What was it doing down there? Was the person who released the light band on Nicholas's side? Or perhaps it was a powerful master of the other shore realm who also supported Nicholas. Zen made countless guesses in his mind. He was quick to come up with different ideas. Originally, he had been immersed in the joy of completing his mission. As he noticed the scene though, he had immediately felt that his efforts might have been in vain. All he could do however, was continue trying to activate the energy within the 4 divine trees, in an attempt to shake the red light band away. As the divine land continued to rise, the light band straightened out. However, no matter how Zen erupted the energy from the 4 divine trees, or even used both his hands and feet to make the divine land move left, right, up, and down, he was unable to tear the red light band in half. All he succeeded in doing was ensuring that the divine land remained in its exact current position, floating amongst the chaos. All of this is going to cause a lot of trouble. Zen looked and felt helpless. In Zen's attempt to shake the band of light off, it had also caused a certain degree of chaos in the divine land. After all, the violent shaking of the divine land was bound to still cause a great deal of trouble. Certain sources of water such as the great rivers and lakes poured ragingly, forming a torrent. Even a portion of the colorful sea water in the time sea surged outward. Both the divine citizens and the true gods were tingling with agitation. They couldn't help it. Harold and Yan, who were both waiting in the sunrise tree, looked at each other in dismay. Why is the divine land trembling so violently? Are we having a quake? Yan asked at once. I'm not sure, to be honest. It's strange, really, Harold said with a frown. Though Harold had never left the divine land, he knew more things than quite a few holy beings, thanks to his master. Without a doubt however, such a substantial shake in the divine land was absolutely abnormal. The only thought that crossed his mind was, what the hell Zen could have encountered when he was controlling the divine land? After trying several times, Zen finally chose to give up. He was out of options. When Zen took back his spiritual sense from the 7 rings, they directed themselves back to the ground, inlaid just as they formerly had been. Chapter 2094, The Out-of-Land Fiends. Zen chose to continue exploring the palace after jumping out of these rings. Behind the main hall was another hall. Zen pushed open the door and stepped inside, his expression shifting. This hall was hundreds of times wider than the main hall with 7 rings. It looked like it was anywhere between 30,000 and 40,000 feet high. It was so huge that it could fit an ordinary-sized mountain within it. In the middle of the hall stood a huge statue. 3 heads and 6 arms. This 3-headed statue almost reached the roof of the hall. The 3 heads all had the same face, but with varied expressions. The one in the middle was angry, the one on the left was happy, and the one on the right was sad. All 6 arms held different weapons. A machete, a sword, an axe, a dagger, a hammer, and a crossbow. This is the soaring snake sword. Zen's eyes widened at the realization. The sword that the statue was holding was exactly the same as the one Rocher had used in the illusion battlefield. This must be Chiyu's statue. Zen understood now. The figure of the man Zen had seen in the Divine Time Temple was that of Chiyu when he had created the Divine Land. He didn't have 3 heads or 6 arms. This statue before him was perhaps another of Chiyu's incarnations. Zen looked up at the statue for a while. If what his mother had said was true, he was Chiyu's grandson. A mighty warrior as Chiyu who had created the Divine Land had actually had to help his people escape. Just how powerful did his enemy have to be? Zen shook his head. He could hardly imagine such a confrontation. It was also beyond Zen's imagination that the beast bones at the bottom of the chaos really existed outside the Divine Land. After observing the statue for a while, Zen looked at the wall at the back of the hall. The wall was about 40,000 feet high and had words of a huge size inscribed on it. These words could only have been left by Chiyu, Zen concluded, and then began to read the words on the wall. His mother had told him that Chiyu himself didn't use Sanskrit words. The words engraved here on the wall were ordinary ones. Zen could feel the injustice and humiliation Chiyu had felt radiating off the scribbles. I'm Chiyu, the leader of the 9 Li people, and a good enough warrior. But I've just suffered a big defeat. I was not willing to take my defeat lying down, so I made a ship to help tens of millions of my people leave. I hope they survive, and I hope the Chaos Ancient God helps the 9 Li people. The words left on the wall only endorsed what Zen's mother had said. Chiyu had built the Divine Land as a retreat for the 9 Li people. Unfortunately, not long after, the 9 Li people had been killed by the Yellow Emperor guards. How many 9 Li people still survived in the Divine Land, except himself, his mother, and Harper? How many 9 Li guards were left? Zen wondered and sighed. He swept around the hall one more time, and when he didn't find anything that was special, he decided to leave. 3 days later, at dusk, when the sun reached the top of the sunrise tree again, a figure holding an umbrella flew out of the rolling sea of fire on a flying sword. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the sky, Zen stepped on his flying sword and fell rapidly. When he got out of the area that the sun essence flames had covered, he took off the sun-resisting umbrella and put it away. He fell for 6 hours before the sunrise tree finally appeared before him. Zen turned the flying sword under his feet slightly into a different direction and began to speed away. The Divine Land was simply too vast. Despite the fact that Zen continued to fly with the help of the flying sword, it took him several hours before he finally arrived over the Heavenly Sword Divine City. It was 5 o'clock in the morning when he laid eyes on the city. He had barely reached the city when several guards of the Sword Clan rushed over to him. Who are you? Why are you breaking into the Heavenly Sword Divine City? One of the guards shouted. Flying was forbidden in the Heavenly Sword Divine City, as it was in a vast majority of the Divine Cities. Zen was so eager to enter the city that he had forgotten about this. The guards didn't know who Zen was. Zen was about to explain himself when Marsh materialized beside him. Master Marsh, Master Marsh. Although the holy beings of the Sword Clan often stayed in the Heavenly Sword Divine City to guard the city, ordinary true gods rarely had the chance to see them. That was why the guards were being so respectful towards Marsh. Don't be rude to an honored guest of the Sword Clan, Marsh said. Yes, sir. The guards bowed to him and retreated. Marsh turned to Zen with a smile. We've been waiting for you, he said. He then led Zen into the Heavenly Sword Divine City. It wasn't long before Harold, Yan, and Gibson had gathered to welcome Zen. Zen, how are you? The only thing that Yan cared about was her brother and whether he had emerged unscathed or not. Don't worry. The sun-resisting umbrella protected me enough that the sun essence flames didn't hurt me one bit, Zen said, smiling. Yan heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. Zen, what is the situation now? Why did the Divine Land quake so terribly? Asked Harold, concerned. I succeeded in the beginning. Zen frowned. It was pretty easy to control the movements of the Divine Land in that hall. And now? Harold asked. A band of red light appeared at the bottom of the chaos, circling the Divine Land. I manipulated the Divine Land, trying to get rid of the band, but in the end, I could not. The Divine Land has stopped falling now, but I just can't seem to get rid of the light band. Zen repeated what he had seen. You mean, the band of red light has bound the Divine Land? Harold asked, his eyebrows disappearing into his hairline. Marsh and Gibson looked at each other, astonished. As holy beings, they were well aware of the massive size of the Divine Land. Even the universes they had built were as tiny as ants on the surface of the Divine Land. What kind of light band was strong enough to bind the entire divine land together? How long was the band? What kind of powerful force could stop the divine land from falling? It was unbelievable. Yes, absolutely. I had observed it for a long time. The band came from below the divine land, the bottom of the chaos, Zen said with certainty. Harold's mouth dropped open in shock. It was quite a sight to watch Harold drop out of his calm demeanor and look so shocked. Harold, do you have any idea about what's going on? Marsh asked curiously. Harold was silent for a while before he decided to speak. My master told me many years ago that the legendary source world isn't the only place where extraordinary creatures live. There are a large number of creatures at the bottom of the chaos that are despised by the chaos ancient god. They are known as the out-of-land fiends in the source world. Chapter 2095, Control the Shadow-Bearing Sword. Mike was a holy being, but his knowledge was no greater than that of other holy beings. At the very beginning, all the creatures in the divine land, including the holy beings, had thought that they were the only creatures in the chaos and that the divine land was the only world. It was not until they found a large number of Sanskrit words that someone began to doubt this knowledge. They had found clues related to the extraordinary creatures. It was not until Mike had met Lorena that he realized that there existed a greater source world in the chaos. And the source world was not the only world. At the bottom of the chaos were a group of creatures that had been cursed by the chaos ancient god. They were called the out-of-land fiends. Harold had heard his master mention this before, which was why it had been easy for him to connect to the strange encounter that Zen had had in the sun. How strong are these out-of-land fiends? Marsh asked, concerned. Since the Sword Clan had chosen to be on the side of justice and was ready to fight against the alliance of the rich and powerful clans on the floating islands, their situation would become more troublesome if other forces and powerful living beings became involved. This was the reason behind Marsh's concern. Harold shook his head. I don't know. The master didn't reveal much. After all, everything that Mike knew about the lands outside the divine land, he knew from Lorena. But Lorena wasn't experienced when it came to the source world, and neither had she seen the real out-of-land fiends. She only knew that there was indeed a group of creatures at the bottom of the chaos that had been cursed by the chaos ancient god. However, if these creatures could release a band of red light that could wrap around the divine land, while allowing themselves to survive in the chaos, it only explained how powerful the out-of-land fiends actually were. You mean to tell me there is no way to solve this problem? Marsh asked. Harold merely nodded. Marsh smiled bitterly at this. Gibson, who had been standing silently beside him, said bluntly, I feel like you tricked us into getting involved. Harold smiled broadly at this and a moment later, continued, I haven't tricked you. We've been on the same boat since the very beginning. And sooner or later, you will have to make a decision. His logic was simple. If they didn't help the Luo clan, sooner or later, they would end up together. But if they worked together, there might be a chance of survival. The choice was inevitable for the Sword Clan. Both Gibson and Marsh agreed with Harold on this. We can put the out-of-land fiends aside for now. At least, the divine land is no longer falling. Everything is still going on according to our original plan, Harold said, attempting to lighten the mood. The fight between the Luo clan and the Dongfang clan had lasted for many years. By taking advantage of the crisis in the divine land, Harold had begun to pull other big clans like the Sword Clan and the Moon Clan over to his side. During this period, the alliance of the rich and powerful clans on the floating islands didn't take any revenge on the Sword Clan, nor did they have any big move. And Zen had been in no hurry to look for his mother. It was urgent for him to absorb the spiritual darkness in order to reach a higher level of the true God realm, but he still needed time to refine the shadow-bearing sword, which was why he chose to cultivate in seclusion. A secret training room was arranged for Zen in the Heavenly Sword Divine City. Zen sat up straight in the room. He reached out and a scroll appeared in his outstretched hand. A mind method about the truth of goodwill and malice was recorded on this scroll. Zen was still at a relatively elementary level when it came to using the truth of godly way. For example, Zen could only fuse the truth of cultivation nature with his other methods. Of course, this was a different type of truth of godly way, and the truth of cultivation nature seemed to be an auxiliary truth of godly way. On the other hand, Yan's truth of holy words was different. She seemed to be able to utilize the theurgy within this skill after cultivating it. Zen slowly unfolded the scroll, revealing the large words that Harper had written. He read the words one by one, carefully. Just like when he had cultivated the truth of cultivation nature, each word wasn't special in itself. But when he strung them together and read them, this text of the truth of godly ways seemed to exert a lot of pressure on Zen. An evil thought would lead to a fight. As evil thoughts accumulated, a good will can lead to the right path. Everything went smoothly at first. Perhaps it was because Zen had cultivated the truth of cultivation nature that he managed to easily comprehend 3,000 words in just 6 hours. This is much faster than when I cultivated the truth of cultivation nature. A smile spread across his tired features. The cultivation of the truth of godly way had consumed a great deal of his soul power. What he didn't know was that in the well located in the depths of the sunrise tree, Harper was silently watching him. The skin, flesh, and blood that he had condensed some time ago, had completely rotted again. He had once again become a skeleton. Harper could easily observe anything that happened under the branches and leaves of the sunrise tree. And Zen was at the center of it all. Talent. Such talent is outrageous. He has comprehended a third of the truth of goodwill and malice in 6 hours. He would be a legendary genius even in the source world. Talking to Lorena had already revealed to him the extent of Zen's talent. A warrior who had 1,000 Sanskrit land was very obviously not ordinary. But he hadn't expected Zen to be this talented. After all, it was difficult for even the powerful geniuses of the source world to comprehend a text of the truth of godly way in such a short time. After all, it wasn't easy, becoming a powerful master of the other shore realm. I knew the out-of-land fiends were targeting the divine land, but I wasn't expecting them to make a move at this time. Once Zen returned to the sunrise tree, Harper listened to Zen's report. But Lorena said that you were the hope. The fate of the entire 9-Li race rests on you. We are hoping that you could help us out of this predicament, Harper murmured. What, you want to try the shadow-bearing sword now? Oh, no, no. Your understanding of the truth of goodwill and malice is still at the lower level. How can you control that sword? Harper's hollow eyes flashed. Zen was tired after cultivating the truth of goodwill and malice. And now, he was fiddling with the shadow-bearing sword. I've tried this sword before. It's like an ordinary sword and has no life, Zen said, holding the heavy sword in one hand. If I want to use this sword, I must rely on my comprehension of the truth of goodwill and malice. I'll try again. Zen began to recite the truth of goodwill and malice in his mind. When he activated the truth of godly way, he felt the sword in his hand begin to quiver. I was right. Zen was filled with joy as he continued to activate the truth of godly way. After he activated the truth of goodwill and malice to a certain extent, he suddenly felt a vague consciousness emanating from the long sword. This consciousness seemed to wait for Zen to make a choice, but because it was too vague for him to tell what it was, he could only make a random choice. But the moment Zen made his choice, he felt like he was being suppressed by the sword and that his whole body was no longer in his control. Chapter 2096, Battle in Mind. Harper watched the scene in silence. He was so anxious that he wanted to interfere, but soon, he gave up that thought and calmed down. The shadow-bearing sword is a godly sword. Only a warrior who enters the other shore realm can truly wield it. If you want to use this godly sword, you need to fully comprehend the truth of goodwill and malice. Otherwise, you will become the shadow-bearing sword's slave. But since your talent is so great, I wonder if you can break free from the shadow-bearing sword. Harper murmured as he watched the scene in front of him. Lorena's persuasion had aroused a glimmer of hope in Harper's heart. And this tiny ray of hope was Zen. The worst thing in the world was hope turning into disappointment and despair. But right now, Harper still had a chance of survival. When the time came, he would not hesitate to sacrifice everything he had, but he hoped that it all meant something because of Zen. Come on, don't let me down. If you can really tame the shadow-bearing sword while being a low-rank true god, I, Harper, will definitely follow and serve you for the rest of my life, Harper added. The color in Zen's eyes gradually dissipated. A powerful spiritual sense burst out from the shadow-bearing sword, pouring into his mind in the blink of an eye and exploring his soul. It was the soul of the shadow-bearing sword. The shadow-bearing sword had accompanied Harper for countless years. It had been a part of many wars in the source world. Under the infiltration of the truth of goodwill and malice, it had long formed its own consciousness. To be the owner of the shadow-bearing sword, one had to get its consent. One way to do this was to have a complete comprehension of the truth of goodwill and malice. Another method was to use another truth of godly way to wipe out the marks in the shadow-bearing sword, but this was a much higher expectation of the sword holder. It was impossible to do unless the warrior was at the other shore realm. But right now, Zen felt stuck because he didn't fit either of these requirements. After he activated the shadow-bearing sword with the truth of goodwill and malice, its sword soul counterattacked immediately. The moment the sword soul infiltrated his mind, it restrained his soul, causing it to fall into an endless abyss of darkness. He couldn't feel the existence of his physical body anymore, and there was no connection between him and the outside world at all. What the hell is going on? Zen remained calm, but he also knew that he was in trouble. Since the shadow-bearing sword was the sword of a powerful warrior in the other shore realm, defeating it would definitely not be as simple as it looked. In the darkness, Zen felt something approaching quickly. Since he couldn't see anything, he quickly reversed his soul in a moment of desperation, trying to avoid whatever was coming. However, his reflexes were too slow. Fizz! Zen felt something slash his soul. The pain he felt was several times stronger than any physical pain he had encountered. His soul trembled, but fortunately, the soul was not like a flesh body. When a soul was cut, it didn't bleed, and it was quick to heal. However, it would still bring harm to the owner of the soul. It's a sword, Zen exclaimed to himself. Although he couldn't see, he had realized that it was a sword in soul form that had hurt him. When he had just gotten this answer in his heart, he once again felt the sword approaching. He wanted to dodge, but he had barely moved a finger when the sword slashed his soul once again. The sword was too fast for him. He felt a violent wave of pain wash over his soul. Although his soul had lost contact with his physical body, tiny beads of sweat trickled down his forehead. I didn't expect that there would be such a powerful soul hidden in the shadow-bearing sword. Zen felt that something was amiss. Although his soul was far stronger than that of an ordinary true god, he was unable to counterattack in this darkness. He could do nothing but let the sword soul stab him again and again. If this continued, his soul would become weaker and weaker, and would be devoured by the sword soul sooner or later. Why didn't Harper warn me? Zen wondered sourly, feeling depressed. The sword soul continued to fly and attack in the darkness. No matter how Zen tried to escape from its attack, it always hit its target with full precision. It can't go on like this. At this moment, Zen suddenly gave up dodging and waited for the sword soul to get close to him. No matter how powerful this sword soul was, he wouldn't allow it to slaughter him. Whoosh! As he felt the sword soul approaching him again in the darkness, his eyes became cold, and the surface of his soul suddenly formed golden beams of light. Golden sword shadows began to constantly circle around the surface of his soul. The golden light broke the darkness and shone on Zen, who finally saw a long, slender, and elegant sword in front of him. But the sword was actually a sword soul, so its surface was twisted with ripples. That's the soul of the shadow-bearing sword. Come on. Seeing the sword soul fiercely spin toward him, Zen shot the small golden swords on the surface of his soul toward it. Clang, 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 a metallic sound resounded as the two collided with each other. Zen's soul attack was very powerful, but the sword soul had been cultivated with the truth of godly way, so it wouldn't be defeated that easily. However, this time, Zen used his soul attack to attack the sword soul continuously. At the same time, he kept retreating in order to avoid the sword soul's attack. The sword soul circled around Zen's mind and once again shot toward him. It seemed as if it wouldn't give up until it cut Zen's soul into pieces. This sword was actually so troublesome. Zen hadn't expected that the sword that his mother had helped him obtain would bring him a fatal disaster. But when people were walking on the tightrope between life and death, a powerful force would burst out of them. Ripping consciousness. At this moment, Zen finally used the emotion-closing godly way. Although Zen had been using the emotion-closing godly way in the swordsmanship a lot, the emotion-closing godly way was actually related to the soul. It could be said that the base of the emotion-closing godly way was the soul. Buzz! The sword light on his body intensified. As the sword soul approached him again, his soul emitted countless thick golden sword lights that surged toward the sword soul, forming a golden river. Clang, clang, clang. The sword soul was soon washed away by the river and drowned in the blink of an eye. It was evident that the sword soul wanted to rush against the current, but it didn't take long for it to be carried away by the current instead. Zen's eyes were expressionless as he looked at the sword relying on the golden light he had emitted. This time, a cold soul and an expressionless sword soul confronted each other in Zen's mind. After a short while, the sword soul moved and rushed toward Zen again. Chapter 2097, Fusion. Zen stared coldly at the sword soul, and emotionally, he was in an absolutely calm state. The sword soul didn't give Zen very much time. It only hovered in his mind for a few short seconds. Then, the sword blade rushed toward Zen with the intent of killing him. Come on, Zen roared. A light flashed in Zen's cold eyes at once, which were still as bright as stars. In the end, the sword soul of the shadow-bearing sword was only a soul, not a real sword. Seeing as it was constantly being consumed, it would certainly eventually be subdued. Therefore, Zen's soul once again shone brightly with an alluring golden light. Zen sat quietly in a secret room. The Sword Clan, Herald, Yan were not capable of sensing the room's abnormality. Only Harper silently observed the strangeness. That said, Harper was still confused with what he was currently looking at. Logically speaking, Zen simply couldn't conquer this sword with his current strength. In all honesty, it was more likely that he'd become a slave of the shadow-bearing sword. On the other hand, Harper truly hoped that Zen could conquer this sword with his own strength and power. This was the only way that Zen could qualify to obtain his wholehearted assist. 2 hours had passed. Zen was still sitting quietly on the secret room's floor. The shadow-bearing sword had the soul-isolating seal, which could completely isolate Zen from the sword soul. Even Harper couldn't understand what was going on in Zen's mind. 4 hours had now passed. Harper was getting more and more anxious. If Zen really became the slave of the shadow-bearing sword, it wouldn't matter anymore whether or not Harper went for help. It would simply be too late, and Zen's soul would be destined to suffer irreversible injury. Another hour passed, now making a total of 5 hours. It was then that Harper could no longer ignore his feeling of confusion. One way or another, now was the time that the outcome should be decided. Soul-level battles weren't like battles using martial arts skills, in which warriors fought each other for several rounds when their strength was approximately of the same level. Many soul-level confrontations were usually decided on the spot, and there was no time for special exercises. But Zen had persisted for more than 4 hours, and the sword soul of the shadow-bearing sword was still in his mind. What were they doing? Never mind, I'd better interfere first, Harper thought. He waved his skeleton arm high up above his head. A trace of invisible soul energy immediately swept through the deep well and quickly traveled through the sunrise tree. It was true that Harper had been cursed and could no longer leave the sunrise tree. In several aspects, his fighting capacities had been greatly weakened. That said though, his soul had been the least affected of all. In less than a split second, his soul energy had already reached the heavenly sword divine city. The moment this strand of soul energy wave flew into the city, Harold's, Marsh's and Gibson's expressions took a turn for the worse. Even Yan, Reinhardt and the many true gods equally all felt it. Whose soul force is that? Does anyone know? Why is it so powerful? With a sudden bright flash, Harold left the palace, a look of vigilance wrinkling his features. Gibson and Marsh also followed quickly behind. The two holy beings were now ready to fight. This soul wave wasn't the most immense, but the energy gathered within it was another story. It was even stronger than that of a holy being. As for the other true gods, they were holding their breaths in anticipation. All of a sudden, it was as if a giant beast, more powerful than a holy being, was stomping over in their direction. All the weak creatures faced undeniable fear in their hearts. This soul wave appeared in the very center of the heavenly sword divine city. After taking a short pause, it went on its way and headed toward the south of the city. Do you think the soul is coming toward Zen? Harold asked. His voice was high and shrill, his eyes rimmed with panic. The secret room that the Sword Clan had arranged for Zen was in the south of the city, and he was currently cultivating in seclusion there right now. With another flash, his figure disappeared from where he was standing. This time, when Harold reappeared, Marsh and Gibson had also made their way here. The three of them looked at each other and looked down in unison. The mansion below was Zen's secret cultivation room, and that soul force had entered within. Their jaws were clenched with nerves. What should we do now? One of the holy beings asked. Who released the soul force? Questioned another. The two holy beings gazed at Harold as they waited for a response. The soul was so powerful that even if they wanted to block it, they just didn't have the ability, not even the two of them combined. I don't feel hostility coming from this soul, Harold stated calmly. If this soul really wanted to destroy Zen's soul, it would be as easy as crushing an ant. It would be over in seconds. The three warriors could only pray that this soul force wouldn't harm Zen. Or at least, to a bare minimum. Over in the secret practice room, Zen was still sitting in an upright, motionless position. His legs were crossed and he was meditating, completely immersed in the activity of his mind. Just as the soul wave approached Zen and was moments away from entering his mind, Zen's eyes suddenly shot open. When he came back to himself, the surface of the shadow-bearing sword in his hand flashed with a cyan light. Buzz. Originally, Zen had been sealed by the soul-isolating seal of the shadow-bearing sword and thus, he was unable to sense anything outside his own mind. It was only normal that he hadn't sensed the soul force sent by Harper. Therefore, not even a second after opening his eyes, he grabbed the shadow-bearing sword with both his hands almost instinctively and launched a counterattack. The cyan sword radiance flashed and slashed at Harper's soul force. The strand of soul was caught off guard, and in its confusion, Zen took his opportunity to slice it in half. However, once it was halved, the soul didn't disappear as expected. Instead, it slowly turned into gray, wispy shadows. These shadows slowly took shape, and finally transformed into Harper's features. "Master Harper," Zen shouted, feeling stunned. Now that he came to think of it, he had felt that the soul's aura was somewhat familiar. In Zen's defense, however, when something suddenly broke into the secret practice room, anyone would choose to attack. Harper's phantom floated in the practice room, looking down at Zen. Harper stared at him blankly, trying to hold back the surprise in his expression. It wasn't working for him much. "Did you really tame that shadow-bearing sword?" "Yes." Zen nodded his head briskly. "How is that possible? How did you succeed something like that?" Harper asked in a bewildered tone of voice. Harper had thought of 2 ways to tame the sword. That said, with Zen's current cultivation, it was just an impossible accomplishment. Zen blinked his eyes a few times and said, "At first, the sword soul was constantly attacking my mind. Then, it fused completely with my own soul after I cut it into pieces with my own 2 hands." His voice trailed off. As he listened to Zen, Harper fell silent for a long time before he slowly asked, "Is that all?" "Just that simple, That's all," Zen said tightly. Zen pursed his lips and a little displeasure showed on his face. How could he say that was simple? How could he be so degrading? Zen frowned. Just like a maniac, the sword soul had attacked Zen continuously and ferociously without stopping. Zen had clenched his jaw and grinded his teeth hard in order to continuously reactivate his soul force and fight back. He hadn't had an easy time whatsoever. Zen didn't even know how he had endured the last few hours. Fortunately, the light on the surface of the sword soul suddenly dimmed, and at last, it turned into a few pieces of soul fragments before finally integrating into Zen's soul. Only then did he completely get rid of the soul isolating seal. As he repeated what Harper had said in his mind, Zen felt a little helpless. In the end, the shadow-bearing sword was so dangerous and Harper hadn't even warned him beforehand. If he had let his guard down even just a little earlier, he might have been the one devoured by the sword soul instead. Chapter 2098. Writing the Rule. Harper showed a pleased look noticing Zen wearing a disgruntled expression. His lips curved into a smile in a relaxed manner. "Good, very good, ha ha ha." His laughter lingered as the soul faded away. As soon as Harold and Marsh sensed the disappearance of the soul waves, they immediately looked at Zen's training room with concern. After a while, the door of the training room creaked open revealing Zen as he slowly walked out holding a sword on his hand. "Zen, are you okay? What happened?" Harold asked in concern. Surprise flickered across Zen's face as he saw 2 holy beings and Harold rushing over to him. Warmth filled him, making him smile as he said, "An accident occurred during my time of cultivation." "What's this sword?" Gibson asked and stared at the long sword on Zen's hand. The soul of the shadow-bearing sword was thoroughly refined after it had successfully fused with Zen. As the 2 strongest holy beings in the sword clan, Marsh and Gibson had sharp eyes for the well-known swords in the world. It could be said that 80% of the best swords in the entire Divine Land were from the Sword Clan. They immediately recognized the extraordinary power of the shadow-bearing sword at a glance. The aura of this sword seems to be very similar to the truth of goodwill and malice. "It doesn't seem to belong to the Divine Land," Marsh observed and stated. They were curious and didn't know where the sword came from. Because Zen had been brought to the well by Lorena in the debate venue, they had no knowledge about this sword. Whoosh! Zen stretched his arm as the shadow-bearing sword was slowly lifted up. Merging with the fragments of the sword soul, he suddenly realized that his understanding of the sword had reached a new level. He felt like the sword was already like his arm and it could be regarded as a part of his body now. "This sword was given to me by the master of that soul a moment ago," Zen said flatly. "Is it the sword of that powerful man at the other shore realm?" Marsh asked with his eyes opened wide. "Yes," Zen answered and nodded. After merging with the sword soul, Zen had already figured out several theories about the shadow-bearing sword. But as he was still affected by the truth of goodwill in the debate venue, he was not able to activate them. He was very much interested in how much power he could use from the shadow-bearing sword. For him to do so, he still needed to cultivate his truth of goodwill and malice. He decided to do all these things after leaving the debate venue. Meanwhile, in the sky above the time sea, a figure was seen slowly coming out from a cave located at the top of a mountain. After Murphy launched a direct attack on Mike's universe, he was punished by the ruling slate for his behavior in the mountain. The punishment of the ruling slate was still not fixed, but there were certain rules that could be followed. Some rules were to be taken seriously as they held a heavy weight of punishment. For instance, attacking the floating island of another wealthy clan without authorization. Someone who would violate this kind of rule would in return easily lose their life. The ruling slate could directly erase that person's existence. The holy beings were not afraid of these punishments. For holy beings, losing a life could still be mended. After all, the meaning of becoming a holy being was this. If a man killed thousands of disciples on a floating island after sacrificing his own life only and he could still recover his life in just a short time, it was a worthwhile deal. Having such a leeway, the ruling slate made other rules to deal with the holy beings. For Murphy's case, he was trapped in the mountain to reflect just like being sent to prison. Some of the holy beings broke the rules of the ruling slate, and were punished for a divine error or even several divine errors. There were more than one cave in the huge mountain, but hundreds of them. Besides Murphy, there were another 3 holy beings being punished, including the famous Zachariah. The famous GN clan had long declined. The GN clan's floating island had fallen into the time sea, resulting the whole GN clan losing its glory. However, there was still hope for the GN clan. They only needed to wait for Zachariah to leave the huge mountain's cave. After Zachariah's release from the cave, the GN clan with a holy being could stage a comeback sooner or later. Zachariah was punished to be in prison for 10 divine eras, but only half a divine era had passed. It seemed like it would be a long time before he could be released. Murphy attacking Mike's universe was an extremely serious matter. According to the 93rd rule on the ruling slate, Murphy needed to spend at least 3 divine eras in prison. Nicholas, however, was not patient enough to wait for such a long time. If Murphy was really going to be released after 3 divine eras, the battle in the divine land would have already come to a close. At this moment, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the mountain. The thick lightning looked like several dragons, writhing and spiraling madly. It exploded, spreading an aura by which even a holy being would be overwhelmed. In the midst of it all, a figure shot away and passed through the lightning. That man was Nicholas. On his shoulder was a huge ink brush. The ink brush was as tall as a person. It looked like a huge broom. The tip of the brush was embedded with emerald green hair. It was unknown what kind of fierce animals the emerald green hair was from, as it emitted a gentle glow. Nicholas had flown to the top of the mountain. A giant slate stood on the top of the mountain. List of words were written densely on the slate. These words represented the rules of the divine land. The consequence of breaking these rules was very serious. From ancient times, there had been few people who could avoid the punishment of this slate. As the days passed by, the number of people who could avoid certain punishments had increased. An example involved the stowaways. There had been many people in the past 2 to 3 years who sneaked into the divine land from the universe. All of them had successfully avoided the punishment from the ruling slate. Nicholas had sent someone to make a thorough investigation, but they didn't find any trace of a stowaway. He suspected that those stowaways must come from the evolutionary universe, but he could do nothing about it when Harold had distracted the Jong clan. In the end, he just ignored them. After all, the stowaways from the universe were only a group of proving godly warriors. Would it even matter even if they became low-rank true gods? Could they change the situation around? But even if they could, there was no time left. He had no intention of wasting time arguing with Harold. The game should be over now. The 93rd rule. Swish. Nicholas flew up. He held the ink brush with his fingers and squinted his eyes. He patted slightly and a bag appeared on his waist. Inside the bag was a Sumeru space. The Sumeru space was considered to be as large as a world. There were countless divine might coins stored in this space. The divine might coins of the Dongfang clan had been collected and stored over the years. In addition, the alliance of the wealthy clans would also give half of their own divine might coins to Nicholas. The amount of divine might coins of the Dongfang clan was dozens of times more than that of any clan. The rules are destined to be written by me. Now you will never be able to fight against me, he said coldly. Nicholas's eyes slowly emitted a faint light. The ink brush in his hand was already waving towards the ruling slate, aiming to change the 93rd rule. Chapter 2099. Murphy was released. It would require a warrior's divine might coins to erase the characters on the ruling slate. In the past, it had required many divine might coins to write these characters, and it would require an equivalent amount of divine might coins to erase these characters too. The limitations and targets of each rule on the ruling slate were unique, so one had to consume differing amounts of divine might coins to either write or wipe out the characters on the ruling slate. For example, the 93rd rule applied to the prohibition of the holy beings from attacking each other's universe directly. The restriction was not particularly strong, and it was not aimed at any one person directly. Therefore, not many divine might coins were required to write this rule. Nicholas's brush constantly swiped across the rule on the huge slate. The divine might coins stowed in his brocade bag disappeared one by one, and turned into a special kind of energy. He then applied his huge black brush to the slate. The words, divine eras, in the 93rd rule started to blur and finally were erased completely from the stone plate. After erasing the two words, Nicholas checked his brocade bag. As he had expected, it hadn't cost many divine might coins to erase the two words. Of course, the total number of divine might coins that had been consumed was awe-inspiring, even by the standards of some powerful clans on the floating islands. But Nicholas didn't care one way or the other. Then he continued to wave the ink brush in his hand through the air and created a new word, years, replacing the words, divine eras. According to the previous sentencing, Murphy had been supposed to be imprisoned for 3 whole divine eras. However, now after the rule had been revised, he only needed to face a prison penalty of 3 years. As soon as Nicholas painted the new rule, the whole ruling slate glowed with a luminous mist, which meant that the new rule began to take effect. At the same time, in the cave within the huge mountain, the invisible energy that bound the cave had disappeared. The moment Murphy had become trapped within the cave, he was surrounded and suppressed by the invisible energy. This energy could only affect him, and no one else would feel it. Therefore, other warriors were permitted to enter the cave and visit Murphy at any time they wished, but Murphy was restrained from leaving. What? The invisible energy has disappeared. With a sudden gleam in his eyes, Murphy, whose hair had grown lank and was disheveled, rose to his feet. A few moments later, a figure hovered over from the entrance of the cave. It was none other than Nicholas. Nicholas, what's happening? A puzzled expression settled on Murphy's face. I revised the rule of the ruling slate, Nicholas replied with an indifferent shrug. What? Murphy exclaimed, utterly confused. Although he had faced a lengthy imprisonment here, he was still somewhat aware of the goings-on in the outside world. Whenever something momentous happened in the world beyond the cave, his daughter, Rochelle, would come and report to him. He knew that the alliance of wealthy clans had lost in the debate venue. They had not only failed to stop Zen, but had also lost many warriors' lives in the process. Murphy, you have also sensed the shock that echoed across the divine land some time ago, right? Asked Nicholas. Murphy nodded his head glumly. By all appearances, it would seem that the divine land won't crash any longer. So we have to take the initiative and do something about that, said Nicholas coldly. What do you have in mind, Nicholas? A wicked gleam flashed across Murphy's eyes. The wealthy clans, including the Leng clan, the Mu clan and the Tang clan, had their own selfish reasons for joining the alliance of wealthy clans, which the Dongfang clan had established. If the divine land crashed, all of the creatures living in the divine land would be destroyed. Within the other wealthy clans, only the holy beings could survive the impact. Even their inner worlds would be destroyed in the crash. But the warriors within the alliance of wealthy clans wouldn't perish. Nicholas had already prepared a backup plan to accommodate them. He would not only remove the rule that limited the number of true gods in a universe from the ruling slate, but he would also separate all of the universes from the divine land before its crash. Those chosen holy beings, including Murphy, would lead their clansmen, following after Nicholas, and head to the source world, which was much wider than the divine land. Help me seize control of the Abyss Demon region, Nicholas ordered indifferently. The power of the Abyss Demon region is mighty enough to destroy the entire divine land. You want to control the Abyss Demon region? Murphy's eyebrows twitched. For the holy beings, there weren't many places where they could not go in the divine land. For example, places like the debate venue and the time sea might prove dangerous for holy beings to break into, but they could still survive. However, controlling the Abyss Demon region was a different task altogether. The Abyss Demon region was renowned as a 6th grade forbidden area, but even the holy beings had failed to set foot on the first stage of the region. It's not possible to control the Abyss Demon region. Murphy shook his head. In that area, countless evil faith of the divine land has gathered for innumerable years. Can we really seize control of it? He will help us, Nicholas confidently quipped up. That yellow emperor guard? Murphy questioned. Yes, answered Nicholas. Time grows short. Even if we don't take action now, the Luo clan will make its move sooner or later. Lorena, she will surely move on this soon too. A helpless expression flooded Murphy's face at the mention of that name. In his heart, Murphy admired Nicholas very much. No matter his talent, intelligence, willpower, and patience, Nicholas was an outstanding man whom few holy beings could compare with. However, a great man like him still had a weakness for a certain woman. That woman was from the Nine-Lee race and even had a son and a daughter with Mike, and yet Nicholas still couldn't get over her. Murphy didn't understand his weakness. But since Nicholas had consented to do this, Murphy couldn't refute him. The two of them were on the same side, and they had similar goals, not to mention that Nicholas never failed in his promises. Zen had been cultivating his skills within the Sunrise Tree region for less than half a month. However, at this stage, Zen was only able to concentrate on the comprehension of the truth of goodwill and malice. He had not improved his cultivation significantly, and he was still a low-rank true god. After Zen had almost grasped the shadow-bearing sword in his hand and felt the truth of goodwill and malice, he, Harold, and Yan left the debate venue. After Zen activated the token of mountain, he had directly returned to the fairy palace. He had only been away from the fairy palace for a short period of time. He hadn't expected that Lavender could rely on her own comprehension to prove the godly way within such a short time span. However, Lavender was still unable to enter the divine land without permission. After she had become an ordinary creature, she would not be split apart by the divine land. However, if she entered the divine land, she would still be sensed by the ruling slate and would be punished by it. But this time, they had Harold to accompany them. Once he had learned about Lavender's situation, he immediately assumed all the responsibility. After all, it was Mike who had taught Harold how to change someone's blood. In turn, it was Harold who had ordered Wynn to enter the evolutionary universe and establish the celestial position race. If Harold could help them change their blood and they could become true gods in the future, they would then be able to walk freely in the divine land. Making his way back to the fairy palace, Zen did not see Hallett or Augustus. Even Joy was nowhere to be found in the fairy palace. Apparently, after she had sent Zen to the non-combat zone, Joy had quickly returned to the Swirl Forest and helped Hallett and Augustus to control the Swirl Forest. So far, they had not returned yet. Besides, Bromley had already formulated his own plans on controlling the Swirl Forest. Therefore, Harold had no intention of interfering in that. The most important thing for Zen to do now was to visit his mother and make a breakthrough in his own cultivation base. Chapter 2100, Look for his mom. Zen stayed in the fairy palace for 3 days. During that time, Yan became acquainted with Letitia, Lavender, and the others one by one. However, the person who interested Yan the most was her nephew. Jeffrey was still exploring and cultivating in the bottle gourd, so Yan herself entered the bottle gourd to force him to get out. With his personality, everyone expected Jeffrey to rip his aunt's head off as soon as they came out of the bottle gourd. However, ever since then, Jeffrey was nothing but obedient to his aunt. Just like her brother Zen, Yan was strict and merciless toward Jeffrey. In the world inside the bottle gourd, she had taught him a good lesson and made him obedient to her. 3 days later, just as Zen was about to leave with Harold, dim red light rose from the depths of the Swirl Forest. It was clearly visible even from a distance. The red light spiraled up like a tornado, containing a terrifying aura. A moment later, they heard shrill howls. Judging from the volume of the voice, I can tell that it's coming from 30,000 miles away from the fairy palace. That's the center of the Swirl Forest, explained Harold, frowning. Zen's eyes flickered slightly. Are Hallett and Augustus in trouble? Perhaps they have met an obstacle, Harold answered, nodding his head. Do they need our help? Zen asked. Harold shook his head. You're more important than them. But they, Zen said worriedly, but before he could finish his sentence, Harold interrupted him. Our master and their master have already taken the possibility of failure into consideration. It is not your concern. A look of helplessness appeared on Zen's face. Harold's words were so stern that he couldn't argue. However, not long after they heard the shrill howls, a bright white light shot toward the fairy palace. It was none other than Hallett. Hallett always had the look of an immortal being around him, as if he was the person in the fairy painting. However, at this moment, his body was covered all over with bruises, half his ear was missing, and his hand was burned black. It was not until he rushed into the fairy palace that he noticed Harold and Zen. Seeing them, he was slightly taken aback. Long time no see, Harold. Then, he asked with concern, how's it going? Of course, he was asking whether Zen had obtained the inheritance of the debate venue or not. With a smile on his face, Harold answered, it was very successful. Hallett nodded. That's good to hear. How about you? Harold asked, pointing to the center of the Swirl Forest. That crimson light was fading away. However, the fact that only Hallett was here worried them. Where was Augustus? It's so troublesome. Luckily, Joy helped us to stall the swirl bird. It seems to have evolved during these years. Master failed to predict that. Then, Hallett shrugged his shoulders and added, but it doesn't matter. I can deal with it. Harold was the first disciple of Mike, the master of the Luo clan, and Hallett was the first disciple of Bromley, the master of the Gu clan. Both of them were top figures among the consummate true gods. Although their masters had a good relationship with each other and belonged to the same side, Harold and Hallett couldn't help but compete against each other in terms of strength and ability. Ever since Harold had taken control of the Everest Spirit Mountain, Hallett had been itching to prove his worth. Unfortunately, he had to wait until Zen entered the Divine Land before coming to the Swirl Forest. This was a direct order from his master, Bromley. Therefore, as soon as Zen had set foot on the Divine Land, Hallett had come to the Swirl Forest with Augustus. I can help you, but I have to take Zen somewhere first, Harold said. However, Hallett waved his hand and said, you'd better get your work done first. I don't need your help. Asking for Harold's help would mean that he was inferior to Harold. This was the last thing Hallett wanted anybody to think. Then, Hallett went straight to the pill refining workshop. It was not easy to obtain the control right of a 6th grade forbidden area. For example, Harold had gone to the Everest Spirit Mountain many years ago, but it was only recently that he had really taken control of the Everest Spirit Mountain. Let's go. He is stubborn, Harold said with a smile playing on his lips. Are you sure we are not going to help? Zen asked with a frown. I will come back to help him after I take you there, Harold replied. Zen finally felt at ease. His goal was to go to the 6th Burden region to see his mother. When he arrived at the destination, all he needed to do was activate the token of mountain to send Harold back to the fairy palace. It wouldn't take him much time. Besides, Hallett didn't seem to be in a hurry. If Zen were to go to the 6th Burden region on his own, it would take him a long time to travel across 1 or 2 regions with his own speed. Moreover, he might face some unexpected troubles in the process. After leaving Yan in the fairy palace and saying goodbye to Letitia, Lavender, and the rest, Zen and Harold left the Swirl Forest. As a consummate true god, Harold could use spatial transference. The distance he could travel was much shorter than Marsh and Joy, but he could use spatial transference much more frequently. Zen felt as if his body was moving through space again and again, and each time, the scene before his eyes changed dramatically. He didn't know how much distance he had traveled. About 8 hours later, a large city appeared in front of Zen. This is the 6th Burden Divine City, the ancestral land of the Han clan, said Harold. Where is your mother? To the west of the 6th Burden Divine City, the Tai clan, replied Zen. Swish. After confirming the specific location, Harold carried out another spatial transference with Zen. Back when Zen had just entered the Divine Land, it had taken him half a month to travel from the 6th Burden Divine City to the Tai clan. But now, when they used spatial transference, they reached the Tai clan in the blink of an eye. After they arrived, Harold flicked his finger, producing a milky white curtain of light that immediately enveloped the two of them. Zen didn't want to disturb anyone here or attract too much attention to himself, and the light curtain helped by completely restraining both of their auras. After all, although the Tai clan was only a 3rd-tier clan, it had a mid-rank true god. In midair, Zen distinguished the location and said, here it is. Let's go down, said Harold as he led Zen down. The moment the two of them touched the earth, it melted away beneath their feet. The two of them shot toward the ground like arrows and sank into it. As he sank, Harold threw a white flag behind him. The flag flew straight out of the ground and pierced it. A gust of wind blew, and the flag grew larger in the wind, forming a magic array. This array flag was also a supreme treasure of the Luo clan. No one but a consummate true god would be able to see it. And since there was almost no chance of any consummate true god getting close to this area, the array flag could protect this place from being discovered. Soon after they dived into the ground, Zen and Harold bumped into a gang lair. An ordinary true god would find it hard to dig through the rocks, but for Harold, the gang lair was as fragile as bean curd.